Andrew, thanks for coming in.
Yes, sir.
I've been stoked about this. So we were just talking about safety. Safety guy shows up on the job site. There's always something to find on the job site.
For sure.
I love that comment because like I just came back from DC and I listened to these safety guys. We'll just call them safety guys, all different levels of safety within the industry. Right. And I heard something on stage that was like, it was something to the effect of these guys in the field got to stop hiding near misses. They were talking about near misses.
100%.
They got to stop hiding them. And I'm sitting in the stands, sitting in the audience thinking, man, like some of that happens. Sometimes we're hiding shit, but we don't. Sometimes it's just part of what we do. Like near misses is like,
it happens all the time.
We work in controlled chaos.
Yeah.
Every second of the day is like controlled chaos, whether you're standing in traffic, whether you're on a pole, energized three-phase everywhere, whether you're sitting on the skid of a helicopter. Like I remember this one time sitting on the skid, just when it kind of like one of these moments it clicked for me. I'm sitting on the skid. He friggin' pulls up to the wire. I'm going to put some armor on and a damper. That was what I had to do. And I just remember like pulling up to the wire. We're kind of coming up to it. And I just look down and I'm like, and it clicks, right? Like, okay, that rotor's like 8 feet off the wire. And the other rotor is like 8 feet off my head, 6 feet off the top of my head. And I just kind of like glance at the pilot and he's just calm. Just got a whole collective in the cyclic and just like rolling up to like nothing's happening. But I'm just thinking of like, this is like precarious. For lack
so
of
close all the time.
So when safety people show up to the job site, like how do you talk to them? Like how do we connect with them so that they understand this about us and about what we do?
I think first things first is we always try to hand the JHA to them and be like, hey, this is what we're doing today. We already know this is our hazards. SEC is real big about the really getting the hazards out and then trying to figure out how to mitigate the hazards. And I think that with having a good game plan, for one, you're ready to talk about to whoever, whether it be a customer out in the front yard, like, hey, man, you need me to stay back a little bit, safety man, whatever it may be. But I think, too, communication is key, and I think that everybody on the job site knowing what the plan is, and a lot of times plans change, you know. But I think safety man pulled up on the job site, for one, as soon as he pulls up, things that they're looking for, whether it be proper cover, barricades, road signs, you know, stuff like that. If you already have a couple of those things that they're looking for off the bat, you're already, you know, starting it the right way.
Are you finding that these guys understand that much already about the industry and trade, or are they coming in just like...
The ones that I've had to deal with do.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of them that we deal with that I don't see on the regular that I do see on storm. There's quite a bit of them that I see over and over again when we go on storm, and you really didn't know this until they're like, yeah, I got 27 years experience, you know, only been a safety man for 3 or 4 years. You're like, oh, dang, you know. And then what's good about that is they pull up on your job site, especially on storm, because everybody's really, you know, tense and looking at things. They don't really jump on you for the small things because they've been there, you know. But I think in the last couple of years, they add more and more and more rules. And where I come from when I first started was, you know, from a mom and pop and then working for a co-op. We didn't have as many safety rules as we do as a contractor, especially for Quanta. I think I tell guys that come from other companies that are not used to our safety, I was like, look, if you just do it for 2-3 weeks, you'll form a habit, it'll become second nature, and then there's going to be another rule. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
just give it a little while. I know, like, whenever I first started, we didn't barricade trucks. And then they're like, hey, you got to barricade every truck. You're like, what? I'm only going to be for this pole for 5 or 10 minutes, tying in, going to the next one. Got a barricade. And at first it was kind of difficult, you know, and you catch yourself, if you already got to put outrigger pads down, you're already right there. Go ahead, throw a cone out, put your barricade up, and then you're good. And then when that white truck pulls up at safety, you kind of do your scan right quick, and you're like, job site's good, you know, and then you don't have to worry about it as much. And I think, too, once you create a good relationship with your safety man, and every time they come out, you know, you're never going to get 100 on your audit.
Yeah.
You never, but if you do your part, and I think they see effort, that's a big thing, is effort, just to make sure that you're doing what you can, you know. And I think being informative, too, about the safety rules, That way, when they do ask your lineman or even an apprentice, hey, what's on the JHA for the day? You know, and they say this, they're like, oh, okay, y'all did talk about it this morning. You know, I think that's a big plus, a really big plus. And I haven't really had any issues with any of the safety men, really.
What leads to a good relationship starter when the safety guy shows up versus?
I think it's every relationship. How are you doing today?
Gotcha.
I think really put it on them to explain how they're feeling. You know, if they're having a bad day, then I'm not going to. I think, too, they're going to point out what they don't like and what they do like. And I think a good safety man also doesn't halt the job, get down, you know, all that kind of stuff like that, versus like let them finish the task as long as it's, you know, safe, get down and then coach. I think coaching is a big thing because as soon as the safety man leaves, everybody's going to voice their opinion on how that went, you know. And I think if, for one, you just do your job correctly, you don't have a lot to worry about. You know what I'm saying? And if you got a cool safety man that's a coachable safety man, after a while he's going to show up and things are going to be exactly like he likes. You know, I remember one time we had a safety man pull up. We were pulling guts off the line, about to rack up, and I can't remember if it was a blanket or something on the pole or something small. And the groundman hollered up, "Hey man, you want to do that, right?" And he just went and did it right quick, kept moving down. And our point for the day was 3-way communication. We're like, you know what I'm saying? It was the last thing of all to do the pole, you know, and yes, sir.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's big thing is communication. So big. And I think a lot of it is being informative. I try to do the best I can to make sure my guys knows what's going on, but at the same time, you pull up to a pole and you're having to make a plan on the fly every time. You can have kind of a game plan, but it's going to change.
I was just saying this in DC. I moderated a panel, and the panel was about generational transfer of knowledge. And something that was highlighted was the gap right now, the age gap in this trade, in all trades, but just that we have this baby boomer age group or whatever that's like phasing out. And then there's this gap in the middle of like 10 to 15 years right now and growing. So we're like, I'm talking to this kid on the stage, 22-year-old, he's 22, works with us, lineman, running hot crews, running apprentices, right? 22 years old. And like, he's got barely anybody to like lean on. So just this, I don't know, it's wild. So I brought up this point of communication, just like you said. I think something key is teaching people from a younger age communication skills, how to clearly communicate. And that communication is such a big, broad topic. Like your body language communicates things. Like how you speak communicates things. Like we roll up on a job site, like you said, we laugh at it. Like what makes a good relationship starter when a safety guy rolls up on a job site? You laugh, like just be human. But like they sometimes don't think that way. They just come in all guns blazing. This. Like I know this. Like whatever. And you're like, whoa, how are you?
Exactly.
Like, nice to meet you. I'm Andrew.
Yeah, for sure. Right. I think too, though, with the communication and stuff like that, with generational, like you were talking about, I'm sure a lot of folks had it a lot harder than I did. But I think that, like my first foreman, great guy, heck of a guy. They were rough a little bit, you know, but the dude was like a black cat, short fuse, but it didn't last long, you know. And I think seeing him handle himself in situations to where it wasn't just lose it, but you have to be stern. And I was 21 when I started, and I know I had a mouth, and I'm sure he had to put up with a lot that I didn't notice then, you know. And over the time that I've had to deal with guys that had a mouth, you're like, dude, you know, then I think back like, damn, that was me, you know. But I think also too, watching guys above you and trying to ask questions, man. If you don't understand, ask questions. You know, I think some young guys do get in their head that they don't want to ask questions. They'll figure it out, you know, and then they might do it right and they may make a mistake. But at the same time, it's like, don't fear asking questions. You know, I work with some guys that are with the utility that are my inspectors and mentors big time, you know, and they're all above 60. And one of them was a supervisor there at the utility for like 20 something years in the 90s and early 2000s, and left and came back, and now he's an inspector. And his demeanor since I've started working with him has changed. Every morning and I call him, he's like, big dog, versus, like usually he would say hello, and we cut up a whole bunch. But if I have a question, I know who to call, and even my direct supervisor for my company, anything and everything that I ever need, all I have to do is call. And you don't want to bug them, but you just call, ask questions. You try to handle it on your own, and most of the time you do. But if you want to be certain, just call.
I honestly think like this is a great topic too, because I honestly think that this is somewhat part of the problem. And let's chat through this a little bit. But when they keep sticking things on you guys to do, that's not just that procedure that you have to do, it's organizing it. And organizing it means, like, for the foreman, it means 1,000 more fucking phone calls, 1,000 more text messages, scheduling. It's work that they don't see. It's that paperwork that we call, right? That's all part of it. It's like, you got to communicate getting this thing done and make it happen. So they're actually removing that guy's ability to answer questions that the apprentice has 100%. Or that the other lineman on his crew has, because now they're taking that time away and filling it with talking about scheduling your freaking cones layout or whatever it is, right. Whatever the example is. But it's all time. And that's what I find too, is like, even with this and what I'm doing, just like scheduling and all these things that I'm doing removes my time away from being able to handle some of these other questions that are as important. And they're part of like training these people around me to do, what I'm doing.
And I think too, like just recently, I had a busy morning trying to plan some things, and we're out working a pole. And then I have a lineman that, hey, Andrew, what do you think about this right here? And it was a placement of a cutout. And I was like, man, we got to make sure we clear the guy. Don't cross the arm, underneath the arm. It's got to look just like this. We want to access the cutout from the road. And then I just remember thinking to myself, like, I could have been short and been like, figure it out. But that's not who you're supposed to be. Even under pressure and under, I think, they always talk about time pressure. That's one thing that, don't let that get to you. And it's not always deadlines. It's not always the customer's out of power. It's also, I think, too, is when you are trying to plan the next day, the next day, and the next day, when you start planning all that stuff out to where everything's barely fitting in schedule, when one thing doesn't work out, it starts to trickle into other things. So, you have to keep that buffer, I would say, in between jobs or in between tasks. And that's hard. That's hard to manage sometimes. And I remember when I got my foreman position, my superintendent at the time was like, Andrew, the most important part to success is planning. Planning. And it's like, yes, sir. So you take it to heart and you try to plan. And most of the time it does work out right, But my lineman always gets, he always brings it up, and I'll say, yeah, it should take about 2 or 3 hours to do this pole, and then we'll do this one here. I think by the end of the day, we can hit this little backyard service pole and then head to the yard. Well, it's 1:30, 2 o'clock by the time we finish the first one. And he's like, so what are we doing the next day? I'm like, we're going to go hit the next one. He's like, for real? I'm like, yeah. And it ends up working out. We stay late. We're getting hours. We're getting stuff done. But at the same time, and they don't think I do, but I do know what it's like to have to stay late and stuff like that. And you do get tired. Summer's coming. But, hey, planning, if we don't get those 3 done today or 4 done today, now I got to carry that one in tomorrow. And if we don't get those done, now I got 2 at it, and then it starts trickling on. And save quality production. That's what we're about, So I think pushing for success is planning. But back to your question about having guys want to reach out to you. In that same token, when I was answering questions about the cutout, this, that, and the other, I got my new guy that's been here 3 weeks. He's like AP2, he's a great guy. He's catching on fast. But at the same time, I don't want to be short with him when he's my lead lineman and then make him feel like I'm definitely not going to ask a question. You know what I mean? I want everybody to ask a question. You know what I'm saying? Ask. Because if we're not working to our best ability and learning every day, we're not going to be as best we could be. A big
thing with the elite, and just a big thing in general. Like if you're a foreman, if you're a leader in any sense in the industry, you want to make more of you,
100%,
right?
Yeah.
From the people
Yes, sir.
around you. But if they keep sticking things on you to do, it's robbing you of the time. And they don't realize that part, I don't think. Like this thing, and classify it under safety, needs to get done because we've discovered it makes you safer. But like what they don't see is the time it takes from away from you spending quality time trying to build up that guy behind you.
Yes, 100%.
I don't think they see that.
Well, and I think too, I think as a foreman, when you're not in the truck trying to plan, do paperwork, turn in previous jobs and stuff like that, you're able to be the best eye on the ground. You know, DQO. We got to have a guy that's watching the guy working in the primary. And that's fine and all, but who else is going to stretch out guy wire and catch off that guy and do all this, you know? So they're wanting you to kind of like, hey, I'm going to go over here, back off the phase, get off the mat. So they come out the way, and then, you know, they're doing this. But if you have 3 guys on the ground versus just 2, 1 for each lineman, well, now I can say I'll take over, watch it while you go knock this out. Well, then while you have somebody that is looking, I would say, with more of a trained eye, not only close calls. We had a poly the other day that we had cut in a C8 for a gang switch, and somehow the poly got damaged. And it'd been up there caught off already for about 5 minutes. You know, and I walked up and I'm looking around at the jobs. I look up, and when I seen daylight up there by the eye bolt, I was like, that's weird. So I got my phone out and zoomed in. I was like, you know, of course you're like, hey man, we got to hoist on that right quick and change it out. Well, then they were moving, you know, efficiently, and all of a sudden everybody's freaking out. I'm like, dude, it's been holding for 5. It's fine. Just get your hoist on right quick, change it out, you know. But I think you're talking about like leaning on the older guys. I think also too is having that camaraderie where when you do see other foremen, even from other companies that you're cool with, and you roll up at the parking lot at the utility while you're getting material or whatever for a new job, ask them how their job's going. Yeah. And maybe they can tell you about an issue they're having or a situation they had. And man, I had to run that jumper a little crazy on this one because of this, that, and the other, you know, and you can tell them either that you ran into that same problem, what you did, or hey, you might be able to get some of their tips and tricks, you know, to add to future jobs that you do, you know. And then I try to be. Do
you find guys do that?
I do. Yeah. I think if you are open and you have a relationship with other guys on other companies, and even our company or whatever, it's just like you think about.
Does that culture exist? Like
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Because I've heard I hear mixed, like depending on where in the country too.
It depends
really.
on who you are. I think if you are a guy that doesn't want to talk to nobody, you know, but I mean, I talk to everybody, you know. And I mean, I have a bunch of friends that work for different companies that are utility. And I mean, just think about on storm. You go on storm, you go work all day, you come back, whether you're in the parking lot after the storm, you know, at about 10 o'clock at night, well, everybody's at the tailgate telling all kinds of stories. And that, I think, is where you really get a view of, I would say you get to grade other guys. You know, you're like, dang, y'all did that? That's kind of sketchy. You know, or you get to be like, man, we did the same thing, man, and this is what we did, and it helped out a bunch. Because like I said, if you're not learning, and you can learn from all different things. You can learn from other guys' experiences. You can learn, you know how much I learned on TikTok watching Jesse and all of them just do different cool stuff. I'm like, oh, that was cool. 100%. You know, he just put a deal on just the other day about EPZ grounding, and I was like, that was awesome. You know what it is. But when you really see that light go out, you're like, that's crazy.
Yep.
It does work.
Yep.
All you go off is what they tell you in the field. You know, so I think just learning from everything you can. You know, even when I met with y'all, you know, I've never done helicopter work. And I was over here, the first time I met you the other day when we were over in Atlanta, and we were eating lunch, and y'all were talking about all this project and everything, and I'm just like, dang, that sounds badass. You know? And that's stuff that I would never be even around, even as a conversation. The first time I met Dean and Ross was at the Quanta Elite down there, and as soon as I met them, it was like an hour and a half before we got together. It was hot. It was so hot. And we're out there on the little porch or whatever, them cabins, and just hearing them talk about their experiences and stuff like that. I'm like, well, I was going to tell you about some of mine, but all I want to do is hear about y'all's helicopter stuff, you know, because that's just something that we don't have here. You know, we're in distribution linemen and line crew in Texas, and we don't do that. You know, we do a lot of backyards. We do a lot of double circuit 477 and stuff like that. But when there's things that you don't do that definitely interest you, all you want to do is listen. You know, and then you get back like, dude, I met these guys from Canada. You know, they're badasses. You know, it's the truth.
It's just different.
And it's y'all's norm.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think being able to lean on guys.
We just can't access stuff. That's why.
100%. But it's still, y'all still do it.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, I think going to the Quanta Elite and talking to even a couple of guys, you know, that work for Sumter over there, and I think it's the Carolinas or whatever, and they're so cool, and just hearing about them and what they do, and they're doing the same thing we do, just across country, you know, and you start talking to them, and I kind of asked them how they do things and how does their leadership treat them. And man, it's just crazy that, and not saying since Quanta has obtained these people in these companies, but for us, it's been amazing. It really has. I think that it has kicked everybody into an extra gear, whether it be safety, whether it be management, and things change management wise and stuff like that. And to me, it seems like it's all going for the better. And I'll tell you, like, for me, it seems like since the Quanta Elite deal, I mean, I knew who our CEO was of our OpCo, but since then I met him 4 times.
That's awesome.
And they're great guys. And I think
that's part of it too, is like, that's what's, those guys need to get with you guys more too. Right. And that's why that's so good, because that's how they also need to make more of themselves, And I think the way to do that is to get out. Yep. Yeah, exactly.
100%. I think too, we have safety calls every other Thursday just for our division. And all the big dogs are on it, and they all got something good to say. Every time they're on there, whether, of course, they always got to mention driving, safety driving, but then they start talking about, just the other day was about good housekeeping on your trucks, and you're like, you look over at your bucket truck, but big dog, before we leave the yard, you need to strap that down and clean that up.
You wink at the apprentice like that's your fucking job, right?
Yeah, go do that. But it's all good points, and it's things that you get lackadaisical on, complacency. They always say complacency kills. You leave the job site, you got Mac, not real Max, but burr wire Max, or you got cutouts and just trash on the back of the trucks and stuff like that. But I think it's something that you need as a lineman and an apprentice communicate about, like, hey man, we leave the job site today, we need to make sure our trucks are clean, and stuff like that. I think too, having a questioning attitude is a big thing. Back in the day, dude, I just loaded my stuff up and we rolled. We had the old bucket truck with the pedal to the metal all the way to the job site. Who could get there first and who can get back to the yard first? And I think now, with safety so much involved, and now we got the cameras and all that stuff like that, at first everybody was shocked. They're like, God dang cameras. Stupid cameras keep telling me distracted. I'm not distracted, But now, you know what I mean? You're finna get checked. That as soon as you pick up that phone, and it may see who's calling or whatever, I mean, it's distracted, you're like, damn.
There's enough evidence right now.
100%.
Like just over the last year,
that it's
63% less incidents.
You
just can't even argue with it. It's like you're 63% more safe.
Yep. And the accidents that have happened, look what it's proven.
Yeah, totally.
That might have gone the other way. Big company, maybe an injury or death involved. Oh, we're finna get them. Actually, did you check the video?
Yeah.
It's your fault.
Yeah.
It's the truth.
Or somebody else's fault.
100%.
Blaming it on you. Because, big utility truck there. I'll get those guys. Actually, we've got evidence that says it's your fault.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to it's our nature, I think, as linemen to buck the system if you can. Safety, I don't want to do that. How many guts you want up there? And then over time, it's like, you pull up. Do I agree with having a pole that's literally covered in orange everywhere? No. I think if you're near it and you're going to be messing with it and there is an opportunity for something to happen, obviously cover it all up. But, you get guys that did cowboy it before they came to a Quanta company, I would say, and they're like, dude, all we had was like 7 guts, 2 blankets on the whole truck. It's like, well, actually, ours is decked out, dude. We got as many as you need, and we can get more.
Yeah.
Just creating a habit, and I think it becomes the norm.
But that goes back to like, we live in, controlled chaos, and how extreme do you want to go? Like, you know what I mean?
But all these things that you just hear about, even in, all the injuries and incidents and accidents and that happen all the time. You see it constantly on Facebook with accidents. You're like, how did that be prevented? Well, then when you finally get a little bit of intel, you're like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Why'd you set your truck up like that, trying to set a big old pole right in the middle of the primary? Why would you set it off the front? Or, whatever the case may be, so if somebody made a decision to do something that was either out of the ordinary or I think unsafe or not taking the right precautions, like you said, it's controlled until it becomes, I think complacency is a big thing about it, man. We've done it before. We can do it again, It's just every day we make decisions that determine if we go home. And I think if you get a good habit of making good decisions, you'll be home every night. That's how I feel about it.
What's your process for making a good decision and a bad decision?
Well, I think for one is evaluate and know your guys, what they're capable of. If you got a guy that's not quite as experienced and hasn't done this situation multiple times, I think that you need to go ahead and go step by step on describing what needs to happen. Hey man, if you do this, watch out. Let's walk that wire, over here. Let's not just try to move it with just one hoist. I think we really need to walk it, control it. And I think too, like you said earlier, about being not in the truck doing paperwork, out in the field watching, you can see if they're fit to make a decision where Mac placement. You put your Mac head here, you probably need to slide it out a little more because you're, whatever,
Sure.
you're going to be holding that weight of that Mac versus having it outside the grip or just all kinds of stuff.
Leaving yourself room or not getting too well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Think about
yourself.
what's
and it happens a lot, and it's not that they're inexperienced or anything. I think that they're just trying to get the job done, knowing that it's 2:00 and we got one more. It's true.
Yeah, 100%.
Time pressure. I think and like you said about planning and making sure everybody's involved in the steps to make a good decision. Knowing your guys, knowing the job. I think also knowing what the utility wants. Where we work at, they are sticklers, and if they're watching this, sorry, but you are. And it holds us accountable for everything. And I think they'll start realizing that, hey, if I do it, I got to do it the right way. There is no cutting corners or nothing like that on spec or anything. And I think when you do that, they become getting a habit of, okay, last time I did this, we got to make sure we do it again like this because I don't want to come back out here and fix it later. And I think just really good communication helps with making good decisions, getting everybody else's opinion on things. You might tell the lineman what you want, and they're like, yeah, dude, but that was a pain last time. Why don't we try it like this? You're like, well, heck, I didn't see it like that. Let's do that. Let's go for it. You know what I mean? And then I think, too, that I catch myself a lot would be like, not necessarily like over accessing the situation, or like, really looking at it too much in depth, but I think not getting their opinion, telling what I want and starting the job, you know what I mean? Versus being like, hey, what do you think? You're just up there covering up and we come down, we're going to dig this hole. What do you think? Should we set it on this side or that side? What's going to work best for you? Not just best for me, and I think it helps a bunch. I've taken another crew over the last probably like 8-9 months and dude, they're doing great. I went from the crew that I got the Quanta Elite with, and I didn't have to worry about nothing. Tell them this is where we're working. This is the end product. They already knew, and they did a great job. And the one I've got now, they're doing a great job. And I think that it has to do with planning, communication, and then constantly. I kind of tell my linemen this all the time. Like, you got to constantly polish your skills because if you're not here to learn every day and get better, and he's embraced it. Yeah. I see it every poll that we do. I'm like, looks great. You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. And I think for me, going back to whenever I was coming up before I was a journeyman or anything like that, just, can I please get in the bucket and tie that in? Can I please, let me get in there, and after your lead lineman's up there all day long sweating it out and all it comes time to tie in, mile of 477, he's like, hell yeah, you did it, And I think having him down there that telling you like, hey man, when you're up there, if you do this, place yourself over here, you want to stretch out as far or whatever, and just polishing. Constantly. And then my thing is, and I want to do the baddest pole they got that, put us on it. Do my linemen always like that? Probably not, But in the end, when they go by it, you're like, I'll never work that pole again. We did a double circuit. It was actually a triple circuit, but 795 junction pole right on the side of the highway about 2 years ago, big concrete pole and everything. And it went from a 40-foot wood to like a 55 concreter. Dude, just hoist everywhere, hoist backing up, it was a lot. And it took us like 2 full days to get everything done. And you're like, thank God it's done, Well, then like a year later, like, actually, we're gonna reconduct this other side from 795 to 477. You're like, why are we doing that now? We were already here. You think you'll never be back on it. But when you pull up and you look up like, damn, them jumpers look good, like.
Those are the ones you remember.
Yes, 100%. Like, you do. You don't remember that A5 in the backyard?
No.
You're right.
Those are the ones that you're like, and
you're proud of it. And I think 100%. Pride and being proud of your work and not being afraid to say, oh, yeah, we can go over and look at it versus like, let's not, being proud. Go over and look at it. All my jumpers are money. Yeah. I think that really, really, really helps build. I think once you accomplish multiple kinds of jobs like that, and whether it be helicopter wise, where it's all this planning and it took 1.5 years and you get it done. When the next job comes up, you're like, hell yeah, let's go. You know what I mean? I already got a game plan. You're just talking about it. I'm getting fired up. You know, one of kind of them things. So I think back to the decision making is having confidence in your guys that you can do it, whether it's through all of these steps or just through a couple of them, or hell, we don't have to really get a game plan until we get out there. We got it. Yeah. You know, you get out there and you look at it and you're like, well, hell, we'll spread this way. We'll set the pole, work it over. And my guys always like, oh, dude, easy peasy. We got this done. They're like, yeah, right. You always say that.
What makes a good communicator?
Listening to what they have to say. Sometimes that's hard for me because I want to voice my opinion on things right off the bat, you know, and then I'll catch myself like getting 8, 9, 10 steps into the process that we're going to do. And they already have a question on step 2, you know, and it's like, all right, what do y'all got? You know, because I see, all the foremen that I've worked for weren't really like, you know, mean guys or anything like that. All of them wanted it done their way. Obviously that's their job. But I think that for me, I think honestly, it'd be a good communicator is I would rather be overly informative than not. You know, say you're doing a reconduct, you finish the last pull of the day. Tomorrow, you think you're going to start on the next one. And you get on the job site, and the foreman's like, where are you at? You're like, man, I'm at the next one. You're like, no, dude, we're down here. You're like, well, what the hell? Why wouldn't you tell nobody? So I think that when we leave the yard, obviously you already went over your JHA, but just let them know what's happening. Be informative. I watched a deal of a guy on TikTok. I can't think of his name. He's got a bunch of climbing videos and stuff right now. And he was talking about that he was working with a foreman one time that had a whiteboard. And did all this. I'm like, all right, I'm not doing the whiteboard. But I think that's a great idea. Mm-hmm. You know, if you have an opportunity to lay stuff out where guys know, that's awesome. But when I'm in the pickup truck trying to plan, they come to my window first thing in the morning at 6 o'clock. What are we doing today? And I tell them this long list. They're like, yes, sir. Okay. You know, and most of the time they get everything right. We got everything we need on the truck for the day. Sometimes there's a lot of information and there might not be everything on the truck. You know what I mean? Then the old foreman's got to make the trip back to the yard to get the press or, you know, whatever the case may be. But I think being informative is a big thing and being available for feedback. Not just, you got it, roll the window up.
That's part of it, man. Like,
100%.
That's what's getting robbed, I think, from foremen because of all of the quote unquote paperwork that gets tossed on you, whether it's paperwork or whether you just got to be on the phone doing shit, organizing. You're robbing time, that critical time that they could be spending with the crew, making sure that things are communicated.
And some days there's no issue with that. You know, some days you just get that couple emails of the day, and some days you're like, sure. I don't know how many times I don't work the bucket anymore. They handle all that. I love running the digger truck, you know, and poor guys that are coming up, like, let me get that one, you know. But I don't know how many times you get the pole about 5 foot off the ground. Hold on 1 second, guys. You know, and then the whole job's on hold. You're like, yes, sir. All right, sounds good, you know, and then you go and set the pole. Or how many times, you know, you get a pole in the ground, get it plumb, get it cant just right, and then you have to get out of the truck, go to your own truck, and then they got to finish the rest. You know, I would love to help y'all shovel that hole, but I got to get to the truck and take care of this right quick, you know. And it's manageable, but it does take away, I think, from a lot. I think, too, I wouldn't call yourself go out there and be a groundman with them, but I think definitely helping out on the ground. Catch that guy off right fast. You know what I mean? If we are shorthanded for the day, go ahead and shovel, run that tent for a little while. It's fine. You know, we were shorthanded there for about a month on our crew. We only had me, my ground hand, and my lineman. And one guy had left, and one of the ground hand had left and went somewhere else. And I was the one that was also doing the hiring. So I'm on Facebook, on the lineman pages, looking for guys. You know, I need this help. We need a journeyman, and I need a groundman, you know. And luckily it all worked out, and I got 2 good guys right now. But it was funny because we got put on some single phase. And it was awesome because me and the ground hand were racing for everything, you know. And then even though he's a little shorter guy and he's stout and dude's good. He's good. He's a great groundman. But I think just having that little bit of knowledge kind of helps you out. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you go ahead and catch that guy off right fast. He ain't going to need that one for a while. You standing there waiting to hand it to him, you know what I mean? And you just kind of just use that little bit, you know. And after about a week went by, you know, he texts me. He's like, that's fun. You know, having a guy race and, you know, just how it used to be. Yeah. You know, I remember when I got hired on, I had a guy that was equal. who's going to get the digger position? So it's always a race.
Yeah.
And I think having that mentality of like, we are a team. Everybody's a team player. But at the same time, like have that competition where who's going to be the best, not let's just both just chill back here and just do a little as we can, and that's one thing that I the new guy that I hired as a groundman, he had to come in and work for this other guy he's a heck of a ground hand and he wants to climb everything, and but since he does so good on the ground, when he wants to go help after we set the pole and catch services off and this, that, and the other, this guy's like, dang, I got to do all this. I got to sleeve all these services and do all this, and but it makes him carry the weight more, and it also, because he hasn't done it a bunch, ask questions. So it gets him comfortable with coming to me and being like, how far back do you want to cut off that one? Or, whatever the case may be. So I think just being open to listening to your guys' questions. And, every once in a while they're going to say what they want to do. And you can either say, sure, or no, we ain't doing that. You know what I mean? But at the same time, listening, letting them feel like they have a voice. You know what I'm saying? I think that's key. So
listening is so massive.
Yes.
And something I didn't learn until I started doing this.
Well, you think about going to the Quanta Elite deal and you sit there and you're in this whole room with all these guys. And hell, we had 2 rooms there for a while doing all that training in Atlanta. That means every one of them was successful in that same era. They had to, because they wouldn't be there if they didn't, Some of them guys have been foremen 14, 15 years, and it's like, well, if you ain't got ran out yet, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you're telling me that you've got guys on your crew that have been your linemen for 8, 9, 10 years. Well, obviously you're doing something to keep them around or they'd be going somewhere else, I think that
So how do you dig into what that is then?
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Obviously you can't talk to everybody at Quanta Elite, and they want you to reach out as much as you can, but you're gonna find the guys that you cool with, eat breakfast with,
Yeah.
whatever, and just ask questions. You're not gonna get any information without asking questions. And if you sit down with multiple guys at a table, we were like, for instance, at the College Football Deal Hall of Fame, and you're hearing them talk about things, man, and you're like, that sounds pretty interesting. I know you don't want to be nobody's business, but ask questions. Hey, so what did y'all do there? And they tell you how they did it, or like, oh, dude, it was so crazy, man. We were on the side of this mountain, you did this, that, and the other. You're like, dang, that's crazy. That was a lot of work. You know what I'm saying? Y'all pulled rope by hand up the mountain, both sides. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a lot of work, and you're just thinking like, yeah, that's why you're here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. There was something I didn't learn until I started doing this. Like I said, I didn't know how to listen. Like, a lot of people have conversations and they'll say they're listening, but all they're really doing is hearing what you say, because the whole time you're listening, you're just trying to formulate your own opinion so that you can share your opinion on what it is.
Right.
But you totally didn't hear what the other guy told you. And that's what this taught me. It taught me to like sit and listen to what you're saying, Andrew. And then if there's something else in that, you can pull on that thread a little bit. Well, tell me more about that. Lean into that a little bit. No, that's interesting. I don't know. You can communicate things like that without even asking that question. Just by like the body language shows that you're interested in it or not interested in it.
For sure.
And that communicates to the other person that what they're saying is of value. So they kind of keep going until their knowledge is run out on that.
Right.
But so much could be learned in that, because like so many guys just jump in with a big opinion on what's going on, or they want to share their story on the same scenario, but like their point of view on it, which you're totally missing everything that you could learn from the other guy by just allowing them to talk about it.
And you want them to come back. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It need to be a reoccurring deal, I love it when I got some of the other foremen that work for other companies in our utility, sometimes I'll be riding by one of their jobs that I know they did, I'll just think about them and I'll call them, like, hey man, how's it going? Like, oh dude, we're almost done with our hitch. I'm ready to be out of here, or, oh, over here off this road trying to build this line. These customers over here want their power back on, knowing it ain't gonna be on for a little while, or whatever. Just talking to them and just let them know that if you need to call anytime, you know what I mean? And I think too, you already know there's I would say, like, whenever you talk to other guys that work for other contractors at the same utility, for instance, you want to hear how their job's going. Y'all have any issues over there? we're not. Or we tell them first, you start off with issues they're having. They're like, oh, it's a dream over here. You're like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think when I first got over there to working in that utility, my first job that I did was all backyard reconduct, and I was like, is this what it's going to be like every day? And it was 69 kV line, big ditch, privacy fence, and of course the poles are right there. And you have an option. You're like, I think I can fit underneath that line pretty good, still clear my mad, work over the creek, fully stretched out, or I can just get a backyard machine in there. And you're like, we'll just get a backyard machine in there. We're right there. The trucks are now, I don't have to keep booming, whatever. And, we got done with that. Then we started other reconducts and then whatever, and it was not near as bad. But that first one, I was like, golly, but people do that every day.
Yeah.
They do that every single day. And I've gotten more accustomed to it now because that seems like we've been on pole change out for the last, I'd say, year. And at first it was junction poles on the side of the road, like concreters, three-phase taps, whatever. You're like, oh, this is cool. And then all of a sudden they throw a couple backyarders. You're like, A1 backyarder? That's nothing. You go back there and you do it. And they're like, yeah. Well, recently they've been throwing all the junction pole backyarders and all this, you know what I mean? And then you get back there, it's got a tag on it that says, do not climb. You're like, oh, wow, this thing. And you just like touch it. And I was like, you're like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? So you can't even go up there really and move a phase or change any kind of tension.
Without
security. And that just adds that whole next level of we probably ought to kill this out, but then you're looking down, you're like, that's going to kill out about 20 houses. So you end up just throwing a gut on it real nice and easy, getting your new pole set and then tying it all, and then it becomes a bigger process for getting that job completed. My other foreman, he just had a job. It's like 5 poles or whatever on this little stretch. And there was a big drainage ditch, backyarders right next to it. And they hadn't trimmed the right of way in, I bet, 30 years. He had them trim it or whatever and just taking out open wire, putting up pots and stuff like that, And he said the most difficult thing about it was landowners and trying to organize, getting them to move stuff out of the yard, whatever, sheds and trampling.
Sure.
And that's a big thing for us is, man, like I just had an issue the other day, an instance the other day where the customer asked me, he said, the utility didn't call me and let me know y'all are coming. You did. Why is that? I said, well, once we get the job, the utility they're just there for complaints, whether it's ruts or whatever. I said, we are now in charge of customer relations and paperwork. And, so it's like, add one more thing. If you got 4 or 5 places you're going to go visit, you need to be reaching out to the landowners the night before saying, hey, I'm going to be at your place tomorrow. Can you have your dogs put up or whatever the case may be, so that just adds one more piece to the pie of planning and all that kind of stuff.
So you got to get a hold of all of the landowners.
If I'm going to be on your place and I'm tracking to the backyard and I'm putting mats down so I don't make ruts and all that, I try to contact everybody. Yeah. And I think I try, when you get a list of jobs, you'd like to go out and pre-plan. You'd like to go look at all your jobs. Mm-hmm. I don't really have time for that. So the best you got, Google Street View, to get just an idea. Sometimes you're looking from the curb around the house trying to see what it looks like. And you show up, and I'll try to, they do have the landowners' numbers on the prints and stuff like that. And I'll try to contact them, like, hey, man, look, I'm going to try to be out there. And I try to give them a window of time that I'll be out there, whether it be Monday through Wednesday, sometime I'll be out there, And luckily for us out there, we have great customers that we deal with. I mean, I can really count on one hand how many times I've had issues with customers.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and it's great, and
because that's not always the case.
Heck no. And nobody wants their power out.
No.
But I just tell them, like, would you rather us change this out at 8 in the morning? It's going to be out till noon, or would you rather have somebody come out here and your power's out from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the pouring rain, and it's going to be trashed? Your whole backyard is going to be a disaster. They're going to cut that fence down, and it may not get put back up at 1 in the morning. Oh, I think it sounds like a lot better idea to do it at 8. You're like, all right, cool. And I think, too, nobody wants to haul mats and all that kind of stuff like that. But if you do that, you don't have to come back and fix all these ruts. Right. And then the landowner sees you putting all that across their driveway. Like, man, they really went the extra mile not to damage my property. And I think that creates good customer relations, is going the extra mile to make sure you don't damage their property. Because nobody wants to get that call, in the office that one of your crews out there ran over crushed a whole brand new sidewalk or a driveway. So do what you can to not have that issue. And sometimes it may take away from the next job because it took you an hour to haul mats in or, whatever the case may be. And then
how do you start identifying the next you, like the next foreman?
Whenever you have to leave to go on vacation for a week and you don't get a call all week, because for one, you did lay the job out for them. You laid out all. Like, we have a little deal for our pole change outs that me and my buddy created, and it's just actually my wife made it, but it was an Excel spreadsheet where I can put all the places, try to put them in colors where I know I don't go over here and do this pole and leave, go across town. Like, dang, I forgot one over there. So it's just a little bit of organization deal. And, you got all your locates on there, you got everything. And you're like, hey, man, I'm going to be gone all week next week. And then you're going to show up the next Monday, and there's going to be all the prints that need to be turned in, all the stack of receipts from all the fuel. They didn't do none of that, but you didn't get a call. Hey, man, I'm over here. How did you want to do this? They just handle it. I've never
heard that said before, but that is like 100.
That's how, yeah.
So almost test them during that time, right?
Yeah. And
without telling them.
I think the only thing really that comes along with when you get a foreman position that you don't have to do as a lineman is customer relations. Because you're a lineman, you can accidentally drive that staple too hard, cut their fiber, and you can get back your truck and drive off. And the foreman's telling him, like, I'm so sorry, sir. You know what I mean? They just roll out. Yeah. And I think that's something that they would have to transition to. And my wife had a baby back in February, and all my guys went to Holly Springs, Mississippi. They were there for a while. And luckily, I'd already planned on taking some time off, and it worked out great for me. They were on storm. But my lineman now had to step up, and he had the crew for 3 weeks, And I got a couple calls on some crazy poles they were having to build back, like, man, this thing's leaning this far. This is all tore down on this side, but not this side. How would you play it? And I'd tell them how I'd do it or whatever, like, got it. And then maybe 2 days later, I get a call, So that means they went all day out there figuring it out, and making game plans and stuff like that. And that really helps you identify who can handle it, who can't, I think. Sometimes it can be easy. Sometimes it is not. We all know that. But I think when you give them and you test them and they succeed, my lead lineman on my previous crew is now a foreman of my old crew. And, whenever I got word that I was taking over this other one, I was like, hey, man, you want it? He's like, heck yeah, I want it. And he was actually my foreman years ago, and we went our separate ways or whatever, and I hired him back as a lineman to come under me. And he was originally my journeyman lineman when I first started as a grunt. I remember one day they had a cutout blown, and I was like, what's a cutout? He's like, man, it's kind of like a fuse, just a fuse switch. I was like, I'll wait till we get there to see that. I didn't know. Yeah. And then years later, he went his route, I went mine. He came back as an excellent journeyman. You just handle it all. You ain't got to worry about it. And then he took that crew, and he really didn't have to, I would say, like, as a fill-in. My other lineman kind of took it because he was younger and he liked the technology and all that stuff. And he took it. He did really the paperwork and stuff like that while the journeyman took over on the real planning. And then he got the crew, and the younger guy moved up with a journeyman now, and he's got it, man. He's got it so good. He's got it. And I think he's going to be the next one because he can handle it all. We used to ride together to work every day back and forth, and we talked about power lines the entire time. And it was nice because headed to the job that morning, we didn't drove an hour and 15 minutes, stopped and got fuel, ice, and water, and the whole time we're talking about what we're going to do today. It already puts him a step ahead of everybody at the job, but then when I'm not around, he can trickle that information out to everybody. You know what I mean? And I think that helped a lot.
You bring up a good point, actually. Just going back to the safety conference in DC, they're talking about tailboard meetings, GSAs, whatever, pre-jobs, and doing these GSAs, writing them all up, and then having an incident because nobody was talking about, like, you didn't have that conversation after you wrote it all out. You just ticked all your boxes, you threw it on the dashboard, and then you went, did work, and had an incident, or didn't have an incident. But they're talking about how important communicating is now that you've done the GSA. I don't think that they see that a lot of the time either. On some crews like yours or like others where you're riding in the pickup truck for an hour and a half, but you've been talking about the job the entire time. So say you and your lineman are doing that, you get to the job site. How do you now communicate that to the rest? Do you take time to make sure the rest of the crew is brought up to speed on what's going on too? Yes,
I do. I would say my lead ground hand did he grasp stuff fast, and I can just give them mostly just bullet points, man, on what needs to be done, how it needs to be done. Obviously, we've talked about it with the JHA. Yeah. And you're not going to get down to the nuts and bolts of it on the JHA, but you're going to get a main idea and what could happen, and let's not do this so it doesn't happen. And but I think, we pull up, everybody gets out of the truck, get out of the truck. We need to be at the butt of the pole looking up and getting the game plan for the pole we're fixing to do. Mm-hmm. Like I said, since we're on pole change out, it's not the same reconduct that you've been working on for the last 2 or 3 weeks, where you've been boomed up looking down the line of that junction pole. Like, yeah, probably next week we're going to be on that at some point. You don't know. You just pull up and tackle it. And I think when you pull up, communicate what you want at the end goal. So I kind of like to do that too. I kind of be like, hey, this is what I want at the end, and then work back to the beginning, and then establish what to do now. So I think when we pull up, we're looking up. Poles leaning this way. Obviously, it's going to be easier to set it on this side, work it over, but then do this work really from the end product back, and then really establish what needs to be done now. Well, then when everybody starts moving around, getting trucks set up, well, now I can go over there, get my Blue Hole car hotline tag, get everything ready to rock and roll, go knock on doors while everybody's getting outriggers down and barricades set up. By the time that I get back, everybody should be ready to go. The guys in the bucket already have all their cover ready to go up, and now we're ready to rock and roll. And I think I would have to say that I probably do give the linemen more information than the groundmen right then, because as they're going up and getting stuff covered, it's going to take them 10, 15 minutes to get everything covered properly. Now I can really start lining out where they're going to be at, what needs to be happening. But it's funny because, I go to my truck, I'll be doing something on the iPad or whatever it is for 10 minutes. I get back out, and I don't really see what all they got laid out on the ground. I'm like, hey, man, we need to make sure we get 2 guys for this one over here, make up that tap. And, of course, my guy's like, you talking about those over there? I'm like, damn. Oh, yep. Hey, y'all got it. You know what I mean? Y'all doing a great job. Which then now everybody, there's not much downtime. But when there is a little bit of downtime, we can actually watch them, and really focus on what they're doing. And then I try to stand right there. And sometimes I'll say, yeah, I probably would have slid that out a little further. You're going to be in a bind here in just a minute. And they figure it out. They always do, But I'll let them, I wouldn't say get in a bind, put themselves in a little bit harder situation than it could have been.
Sure.
Let them finish the situation. Let them finish, get their jumper made, mac off or whatever. I was like, hey, come on out here for just a minute. I was like, you see, you only have about that much strap on your horse. You're trying to get that tail off in that shoe. If you stretch it out just a little bit further, now you got a little bit something more you can work with. You don't want to have it all the way out where you got, 5 or 6 foot of tail, but you got this much and you're trying to get it off in this shoe. And he's like, I know. You know what I mean? He's like, I realized that after I cut it. You know what I mean? And then the next time we go up on that pole, you'll see they got 4 or 5, get a couple clicks, and they're easily working it. And then I guess that's a product of it. You get to see that later. It may be a month or 2 before you go back and do that same kind of pole or that situation. But you do see, and you wanted to say something that second time, like make sure, but you're just like, let's just see what happens.
At what point do you jump in? Just for like,
I think if it's gonna really, really mess them up pretty good. You know what I'm saying? Like if it's gonna put them in a bind where it's causing now is 15 minutes because you got to get another hoist, because that doesn't happen. They do a good job. They really do. But I think there are tips and tricks that everybody learns, whether it be somebody taught you or you're up there in a bind in the bucket and you're like, I'm not gonna do that again.
Yeah.
And then if I see something up there, I remember the other day they had most of all their 20-foot max that were already used either somewhere else on the job or on that pole, and they couldn't stretch their hoist their max out as far as they wanted to, but their hoist had to go outside the max, and I was like, man, once y'all get that tension, whatever, you can always tie your back head up to your strap hoist, and then you ain't got to worry about carrying that weight, They're like, that's right. You know what I'm saying? And then that difficult situation now is not even worried about. It's contained. And that's things that people do that every day. It's not a big thing. But if they're not familiar with that, and they are, some folks go through different steps and different processes and different paths of being a lineman. Some people get thrown to the wolves early. Some people have different tasks they do for a long time during their lineman stretch, and then all of a sudden now they're in in town backyard or doing junction poles or whatever the case may be. You're going to have to learn new things. And I always tell somebody, it may take you 2 or 3 times to do it where you got it down. And when you get it down, put that in your back pocket, because it may be a year before you do it again. But whenever you got a new apprentice from, you're like, hey, dude, watch this. You know what I mean? And you let them over there fighting it, and you're already done. And they're like, how'd you do that? You're like, well, now let's see. Let me show you now how to do it. You know what I mean? And I think that that's another thing is like, don't hold on to your tips and tricks. share it for everybody, dude. Share it. That's why, like, now, dude, I love watching, like, you know, whether it be AJ or whoever's on TikTok. If I come across a video, you know, I'm going to watch it. It may be something that I've already known, you know, but I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it.
Yeah.
You have to, because
the devil's in the details. Like, might be that one little thing he went left with his wrist, right with his. Like, oh, fuck, that's the secret. Like,
yeah. And it's funny because I really get blown away with the guys at my utility that are my management, I guess you would say. They've all been linemen. They were linemen 70s, 80s, and 90s, you know, and they always talk noise about us having jibs and power tools and, you know, whatever's like, we was back doing line work when it was line work. You know, they always say, that's like their key word. We were doing line work when it was line work, you know, and
we're free climbing.
Oh, no, they were telling all this stuff.
Hand
so
pressing.
literally, like, for real, they were like, oh, dude, we were up there pumping it up, you know, whatever. So I remember one time I was like, I need proof. And sure enough, it was the next day. He brought me a Polaroid. They were setting their first, like, good fiberglass poles, you know, and they had to put the pegs in it to get up there, you know, and he was transferring hot phases from here to here. And I was like, damn, I guess you went lying. He's like, no, you got to put this thing under your elbow, get this one, you know, developed. I was like, oh, it's like 94. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're a beast, you know, and that's why he's got 2 shoulder surgeries. You know, they were savages back then. And it's funny because we'll be out on a job, you know, and they always just talk about, man, we got it made. But we got it made to where we can make things easier, faster, quicker, safer, get more production, you know, because back then, you know, you think about walking wire. Not everybody can walk wire with a bucket. We can always tie a rope around it and do whatever back in the day. But you really know how to do hoist work, you know, and you still do now. But you see folks out there, they'll catch it with a jib and never side load it, but, you know, and do stuff. But I'm just saying, like, you learn those techniques and stuff like that you don't always see nowadays, you know. And I think also, too, when you watch guys on TikTok and all their pages showing you all these tips and tricks, and you see that hoist come out or you see them do things that you haven't done, you may never use that. But you can alter that into something that you are doing and give it a try. See if it works.
These guys have never... You talk... I love what you're saying, because the beginning part of my career was the tail end of all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I started right out of high school. I graduated in 99, started my apprenticeship in 2000, topped out in 04. And fuck, man, like, that was MD6 presses, like, by hand. That was, it wasn't a brace and bit drill, but it was like hydraulic guns in the bucket, right? Like,
leaking everywhere.
Fucking never, none of these guys have ever had a hydraulic gun explode on you. Like, the hoses explode on you in the bucket and just, like, oil and shit. Fuck, dude. Some of the bucket trucks we used with actual like leveling cables in them, not, you know, so you're going up and it's got, and those leveling cables would snap sometimes.
Ooh, I've never had one snap. I had one get to where your bucket's like,
dude, like,
yeah,
some of the shit. I remember, so battery operated tools was like, it was just the beginning of, like, battery operated tools. So battery operated tools would last like 5 seconds.
Well, and you only had one. Ground hands never got a hold of them.
So we didn't actually use them. We would take, like, a little pocket generator, strap it to the fucking boom with a little tiny extension cord, because you couldn't have shit like that in the bucket, but we would. Yeah. We'd drag it up there and you'd make cuts. Like, I don't know, dude. It's funny, though, because...
Well, you think about, like, where we're at now versus then, that's 25 years.
Yeah.
Where are we going to be at 2050?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm interested to see.
Yeah.
You know, I am... where we work at, you know, we do a lot of duck iron poles, and back in the day, we only had a couple metal poles that we messed with, and we had to have the generator with the extension cord and the magnetic drill press, you know, that was said made in China on servers, like 60 pounds, and I got a good scar on my finger. I remember, well, you get it on there, and the dang chuck would loosen. I mean, you tied it up the best you could, you know, and I remember getting it off one day and having it on lift my bucket, holding the drill bit, tightening it up, well, then I torqued the drill off the lip of the bucket. The drill fell on my finger, cut my finger all up, and I was like, this is horrible. Well, now we got the Milwaukee, you know, battery powered magnetic, and it just...
And it's light, too.
So nice. It's so nice, yeah. The guys, they don't always love bringing it out, but it's like, okay, do you want to have a hand drill?
Yeah.
Or would you rather use this thing? And it pokes a hole right through in about 9-10 seconds, you know. Tools make the job just so much better. Yeah. The right tools, you know. You talk about, hand pumping presses. Now we got a Bernie press that can go up to 1,000. Paddles in 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. I mean, in 2 minutes, you got all your jumpers for a switch made.
Yeah, how many Y35s just like.
Well, then you go up on a junction pole, you're looking at it, you're like, dude, whoever did jumpers on this is a tired joker at the end of the day. For real. Yeah. And it's just cool because being around older guys that I do deal with on the daily, they come out to the job and they inspect our jobs. And it's funny, I've watched them inspect our jobs before, and they walk around 3 or 4 times with a plumb bob. I'm like, dang, dude, you didn't get it right the first time? It's not that. They're making sure it's perfect, lock nuts, washers, everything. But it holds you accountable to everything. You know what I'm saying? I remember when I first started, my foreman at the time, which is a really good buddy of mine, we had our first go back on that backyard job. First job I was on, it was like 9 things. I mean, it was, I don't remember, some small things, very small things. I was like, 9? We got to go back for things. Like, oh, dude, back in the day, I worked for this one company, and we had a list like that. I was like, I'm kind of ticked off that I got to go back in that backyard with a backyard machine. I don't know if it was I don't remember exactly, but a couple things.
Staple
Not even that bad. It was literally small things that we were able to knock it all out in like 3 or 4 hours, had them all done. And like now we'll go, 2, 3, 4 weeks to turn in all these jobs in and have one small go back, and it'll be either y'all should have fixed those ruts before you left. You're like, oh, I'll go out there and fix ruts all day. That's fine. You know what I mean? But as long as you know that when we leave, that power line pole is going to be right, and that's what I want, and that's what I think. Whenever we bring guys up, that should be their goal, is to carry that on.
Do you find that is the goal still?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
I do. I really do, and I think it all falls into pride.
Like that's still the culture out there?
Yeah.
Good.
I do. It does. I do, because there's other guys that I work around. I drive through their job that I know they can't finish working, and they all look great. They all look good, and then I have, years ago, we had a couple other contractors when I was working for the co-op, and you go by theirs, and you're just like, dang, dude, you could take a little longer and a little more, effort on those, those jumpers or whatever it may be, or, man, we're all even like looking at when y'all can't that pole. It happens. Yeah. And with us working for where we work now that have their spec is, it's got to be by spec. It ain't like you can just go up there and make it hot and safe, call it good. No, it ain't right. Spacing, they want it right. And so, like I said, it creates a good lineman, I think, because you'll know the first time you work on something on that pole, make it right. You know what I'm saying? Versus you don't want to come back and bring your bucket out there and have to set back up on it. Especially if you got to do all this extra stuff of bringing mats and all of this. Been there once. And I remember we had another company that had a small reconduct next to us. We were working on the blacktop in a neighborhood, and they were in the backyards. And a guy had brought up a service underneath the phone line. It was a small phone line dip. I mean, they didn't see it. We had to go back and take down all that chain link fence and do, had to make it right. And it's like, dang, I thought you were doing this job. And here they come back with one truck and one backyard machine. It's like, dang, dude. But hold you accountable to it.
That's the way I was raised too, it's a craft.
Yes.
And you should be proud of it. I know it's power lines and it's the ugliest thing in the world to most people in the world. They just want to get rid of them.
Then why do we look at it every single pole you drive by?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I do. And I'm judgy sometimes. I'm like, dang. Then you drive by, you're like, I was driving here earlier and I was in Spring, and I'm just like stopping all that traffic, and I'm looking over. I'm like, man, the coordination it took to get all that in there between all those buildings, 60-something foot vertical, it's just like, it took a lot of work.
And it's always that one too. Just a little piece of advice for anybody. It's that one structure you're on where it's the end of the day. And in order to just match that outside phase seg, it's going to cost you another 20 minutes or half an hour. And you're just like, it's by all accounts, it's fine.
Yeah.
But it's not perfect. That'll be the one that you leave and you drive by every single day and see it. And you're like, God damn it. And you never get back to that one again. Yeah. Yep. It's either good, either you took the time and did it, or you left it, and it'll be like.
And if you do see that and you do leave it, you'll make sure on the ones in the future you don't.
Yeah, 100%.
And I mean, I tell you, there's one phrase that we all know that I do not like saying it. I don't like being around it, especially if it has to do with me, is it looks good for my house. And I don't care if we are in Tampa, Florida, and the roof just got blew off Tropicana Field, and we're down there and there ain't even nobody around. Make it look right.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because you got to live with the fact that you did not do it correctly or properly or whatever the case may be. Make it look good.
Yeah.
You know, and just when you're surrounded by guys, even with your company, and there's 8, 9, 10, sometimes 12 crews that are all working near each other and by each other, they know they didn't drove by you once while you're up there working. They know that you worked that pole. And then when you get, haven't seen this specifically, but I'm just saying, like, when you get to that hotel in the evening, everybody is out there in the parking lot, like, dang, dude, why'd you leave it like that? Or, you know, whatever. We've been on the opposite side of that where we've seen guys working and you're like, what are y'all doing? You know, but you try not to start nothing. You just try to leave it to yourself and just talk big noise in the crew truck. Like, them dudes, you know. But whenever you see people doing things, obviously they're unsafe, you would like to say something and stop it. Like, hey, man, I don't know if you see that or not. But you can make sure your ground hand, you're like, did you see what he did?
Yeah.
When you get up there, you don't do that.
Pay attention.
Yeah.
That's what you pay attention to. Yeah.
And I think, too, you know, whenever I first started building power lines, my father-in-law was my superintendent that got me on. And he was always kind of, not rough, but he was, you know, I couldn't get my first raise until I could frame everything. Well, you ain't going to be able to frame everything for a while. You know what I mean? We'd be out there on something, and I remember I'd go see him on the weekend, me and my wife go and eat dinner, you know, and he'd be like, so did you get your framing down? You're like, oh, yeah. And he'd throw out some crazy pole. You're like, I'll get back to you on that, you know. But it holds you accountable.
Yeah.
Not just because you're here 6 months, you get more money. You know, and I think that's kind of like what goes along with the apprenticeship program these days. I think now that we at SEC are now with the NLC, you have to pass things other than just a test on the internet. You know, before we were with the Department of Labor, and a lot of guys took it seriously, don't get me wrong, but there was still that tenure. I'm here 6 months. I'm here 6 months. I'm here 6 months. You're getting moved up. Well, then all of a sudden, you're 2 or 3 steps before journeyman lineman, and you ain't even really worked no junction poles or anything, you know, whatever the case may be. And there's people out there that are making a bunch of money that can't walk. You know, they can walk, they can't do it on the job site.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? And also too, I feel like with us being at the NLC, you know, I've got one hand that works there with us here in Bryan, and he's awesome, man. He started with us as like an AP2, and I think he's like an AP6 now or something like that. He's going to start his 3rd year at NLC, I think in June, and he's a great guy. He does a great job he does a great job at the job site. But he was young. He's 21 when he started with us, and you know, everybody does some goofy things on the job site. You're like, what are you doing, bro? You know. But his first trip to NLC, he like aced everything, you know. And then when I had our employee advancement guy in Mississippi call us, like, who is this guy? I'm like, oh, he's my ground hand. He's like, he aced everything. The tower climb, I mean, everything, pole top rescue, fastest one. I'm like, really? You know, you're like, you know, so then you got to make sure you go tell him, like, hey, dude, they just called from the office, man. Great job, you know. And then you fast forward a year and he's on his next trip, same thing. And so now you tell everybody whenever they hire on and they're going to the NLC, they're like, man, they got me taking all these quizzes. And I'm like, talk to Xavier. If you can do it, you can do it. That's all there is to it. You know, and he rocking and rolling. Yeah. You know, and I think that's the kind of guys that you want to have because they take things seriously. You know what I'm saying? It's not just to get a pay raise. You know, they want to learn. They want to be able to tell you why and how you do it. So whenever they do finally get that chance to get out there, which he's right there at it now, they're interested. They ask those right questions. You know what I'm saying? Versus just being a body in the bucket. Yeah. And I think that's a lot we have right now is bodies in the bucket. You know, I was a body in the bucket there for a little while. You know, we all were when we were young.
I was just going to say, do you think we have – I'll give you some context on this. I get in a few little, you know, I won't call them arguments, just debates or whatever, just like information online where I'll get questioned. So I got one the other day. It was like, this guy says, okay, Ryan, you're raising awareness about the industry and about the trade and all this, right? He's like, I think we have enough awareness for young people. Like there's enough young people coming into the trade and going to these line schools. And he's like, we don't need that anymore. Like, that's what I said. I said, we need more. That's not the problem. We need more. I see like one of the issues is there's not enough hands in the field to train these people because of the system that is there. The system that we have is an apprenticeship system, which is on-job training, so many years. I think there's some better ways, or there's enough good quality people and organizations out there to figure out better ways to shorten the gap in training people to make a journeyman. Like, I think there's some things so anyway, that is the piece, because I don't think we have enough quality hands in the field to teach these guys, because the work exists. Mm-hmm. So on one end, you have the work and they're just dumping more work. It's out there.
There are plenty.
And you have some kids coming in. We need more. Mm-hmm. But I think it's that piece in the middle that we're missing. That piece in the middle is us.
Well, I think I think you're 100% right on that. Definitely. And I think that there shouldn't be timelines on your growth and your...
It should be competency based, right? So how do you do that? That's what...
Guys, whenever you get on the job site, their first day on the job, first they showed up with tools. That's a plus, on the job, whether they're from a line school. Not everybody has to be hired from a line school. It has to have experience. Where we work at, they want you to have at least a year experience and go to line school. And I had a guy that came on not long ago, and he didn't last a couple weeks, you know what I mean? And he's a good guy, a great guy. It's like, but man, now I have a new truck with Quanta Elite on the side of it. I have to keep that name up. I'm sorry, dude. I can't really just start training a guy from the very beginning. And you told me you have a year experience, and it's like literally like I just picked you up at the Home Depot. You know what I'm saying? Like, sorry, cat, that can't happen.
You gotta go learn some shit first. Yeah.
But I think too, though, I guess a lot of guys, like you said, you have to be able to have hands-on training. And I think there's something that falls into this category for me. I remember the first thing at Quanta Elite, or first time at Quanta Elite, they said that you need to be finding your replacement, okay, as a foreman. Obviously, I agree with that 100%. And they said, you need to be training your journeyman needs to be training your apprentice needs to be training it's a trickle effect.
Yep.
That's all good. Yeah, that's fine. But I think the real thing is, if you have anybody has an opportunity to train anybody, take it. So if I'm on the ground and I am seeing these guys over here fight with this, or they're cutting these jumpers for this with way too long, it's going to give the lineman, trouble when he gets up there, whatever, go over there and tell him why, what, how, or like I said, tips and tricks, tell them, be involved. Don't just rely on the guy above you to teach you. You know what I'm saying? And also, I think even groundman can be talking about things and figuring out ways to make it easier. Somebody out there did it the hard way on every task at first, and they found a way to make it better. Yeah. And I think that, not necessarily ranking your guys, I think being able to evaluate your guys and know where they stand, and then a month later how they're doing. Are they improving or not? And if they're not improving, maybe you need to take a little more time and go over there and be like, hey, I'm noticing, man, you're just not catching on this. Like, what is it, And maybe it's the way that I'm explaining it to you, or the lack of information, or whatever the case may be. And I think that getting guys from the beginning to even like the middle, apprentice, starting to get in the bucket, do easy things or whatever, go over there while they're up there DQO and watching and be like, what would you do next? And you may get something, you're like, well, you're not quite ready. You know what I'm saying? Or you may get something like, exactly. Yeah. I had a guy that was working with me that has left and a couple years back, and now he's a lead somewhere else, but he was just finna start getting in the bucket a lot, and he'd get up there every once in a while, and I had 2 journeyman linemen that showed up every day, ready to work all day. And that was it. That they were ready to go all day, every day. And he was a groundman that would get in the bucket, but he was a very high paid groundman at the time. And he did a good job on the ground. And one day I just seen him kind of upset over there, and I was like, hey man, what's wrong? Nothing. And I was like, dude, something's up. What's up? And he's like, man, I just feel like, I'm ready and I'm willing, and you just don't ever ask me to get in the bucket. And I told him, I said, well, look, man, I got 2 guys that show up every day that are ready to go. I know what I'm getting. I know what the end product's going to look like. If you're sitting here watching them, turn around, look at that next one. And if you've got a good game plan, come up to me, present it to me, and say, I want that one. Well, go for it. Sure enough, here we are, the next poll, he's pumped, getting his sleeve gloves out, get up there and getting coached to do it and all that stuff like that. But don't always rely on the foreman to give you an opportunity.
Dude, I think I also pause there for a second because I think this is a great point they bring up. We started talking about this right before we actually hit record, but I think this is one of those issues. Guys get scared that they're going to get pushed into a foreman position when they don't want to be a foreman, right? But then that hinders them from being leaders. And this is what I want to say is like, you can be a leader. Please be a leader. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean you're going to get the title if that's not what you want.
Right.
So if you don't want to be a foreman, please don't let that hinder you from being a leader, because we need all these people below you to be trained and to learn these things. Like, so start making decisions, be okay with making decisions based off of your experience, your knowledge. Just
somebody's using a concrete drill somewhere.
That's on the
hope they hit rebar. But yeah, it's very true. It's very true. And I think that giving them,
because there's lots of great linemen that are awesome leaders. They've been doing the job for a while. They're experienced. They're really good. I can think of a couple right off the top of my head right now without naming names. They're freaking fantastic. Really good at teaching people too. Did not want that. Like refused foreman positions at all costs. Just want to be a lineman.
Do you think it's because of the responsibility, as in you take the blame for anything and everything that happens? That's part of it. That's part of being a leader in anything you do. Whether you're a head coach for a baseball team, that team mom's jumping you. You know what I mean? Or whatever the case may be. But I think if you took all of their responsibility and their titles within a foreman and a leader, and maybe just take off some of the ones that maybe we don't have to have so heavy on, and that could be able to create more room for improving those other areas, whether it be communication through customer relations, could be training that guy, or whatever, and I think we try to work 11 hours a day. My first hour of the day is writing the JHA, getting somebody else to write it, whoever wants to do it. I do most of it all the time because they're out there getting material ready or whatever. But I remember I went to a foreman training like 2 or 3 years ago in Arkansas, and that guy said that Quanta allows 1 hour per day for JHA, period. 1 hour. And it's supposed to be everybody involved, even writing it, but I mean, sometimes that can't happen. But so you're talking about, I have 5 men on my crew, all of their wages. We work 4 days a week, times 4, that's that much money, times 52 a week. You're talking about, then most of that times every crew in Quanta, that's a bunch of money, but it could prevent one accident that could be millions and millions of dollars. So it's worth it for that 1 hour. Well, then we go out there, driving to the job, whatever. When I get out there, I really need to spend what I have left through the day to be able to be with the crew. And sometimes you don't get it, sometimes you do. Yeah. And I think that I have heard of some, and there's some days that I am in my truck more than other days, and I'm sure when it's hot outside, they all think, I think he's in a truck again, but it is hot. I do like the AC, and I'm also doing paperwork. You know what I mean? Yeah. But
I get to plan my days.
Exactly. I'm planning. So I think that there are some guys that don't have anything to do with none of it.
Yeah.
They put all of that weight on that lead lineman. Some of them prosper from that. They do a great job, and some of them, I think, that's why they start getting like, oh, okay, I got a taste of that. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to build power lines, go to the house. Because I remember when I was just a lineman, when we went home on Thursday, I didn't think about what we were doing until Monday morning on the way to work. Now I'm at the dinner table sometimes on Saturday, and my wife's like, what do you think about? It's like, you already know. She's like, oh, it worked. Just because I have to make sure that I got all that stuff in my head ready to rock and roll for Monday. And that's every foreman. Every foreman has to do all that. Pressure's on them.
Yeah.
And I do think that for me and my superintendent, general foreman or whatever, he's got a lot going on his end, so he lets me handle all of it. And that is nice, because then you don't have to worry about relaying through him to get something back to you here. That's great, and I'm sure, and he don't try to mess with it either, but sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it can be a lot.
How do you like your linemen to communicate to you? Like, what do you want them to be telling you? They have no problem
communicating.
Yep.
They voice their opinion on a lot of things. I think that also comes with being able to talk noise all the time. Of course, you're on the job, it's like everybody's talking noise, which I talk noise. Hey, you're wearing your tight pants today. Yeah, my wife didn't wash my other ones. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Whatever the case may be, so they're able to talk noise, whatever the case may be. And I think when you have that comfortableness where everybody can voice their opinion on jokes and all of this, that, and the other. When it really comes time to talk about something for real, they're comfortable with it. You know, that's easy to talk about now. You know, I done capped on your new haircut. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I think that, I think that's not really an issue for me. And I'm also one guys, like if I notice that folks have issues or having an issue with something that's going on the job site, if I can't pull them over, and I don't like to single nobody out, you know, so they get down, they rack it up as they're getting their, you know, cones put on the truck or whatever. I don't want to pull them off to the side in front of everybody. So when we're on the way to the house, I'll just give them a call, you know, and talk about it. You know what I mean? And maybe there was a misunderstanding about what I had said in the book when y'all were up there working, and it was just a miscommunication. And we had to kind of divert from what y'all had in y'all's head to what I had in my head. Now y'all are actually doing what we had wanted to do. And they think that I was just changing plans on them. You know what I mean? And maybe I can call them and say, hey, this is what I was talking about. You know, you were thinking of something completely different and we just didn't connect. So how can we make it to where next time when I say you do this, is it echo protocol? Is it three-way communication? You know, or whatever, just boom down. Let's talk about it more like this versus like, you know what I'm saying, like yelling.
So that's what I mean, and that's what I was digging into was like, okay, you said it's not a problem for you, but it's these things that you do that make it not a problem for you.
I think it helps 100%.
I was just trying to dig into what those things were.
And I think I remember back in the day, you know, you got radios on your trucks, and I remember you used to. Now, of course, we sag all of our wire with dynos and all that kind of stuff because it's got to be precise and everything. But back in the day, you know, you're sagging, you know, a mile of whatever, you know, you got the guy out there bumping wire, you know, and you can barely see him. So he's, you know, is he telling me to go up over here? So you got the guy on the ground on a cell phone or on the radio that hardly works in the truck. And are you sure you said 15 clicks? You know what I'm saying? Or whatever the case may be. You know, I used to always think about carrying a little walkie-talkie, you know, and I tried that one time and that was a disaster. It fell down and got crushed by a drill. And I was like, I'm not making that decision again. Yeah. So, but you find better ways to do it now. And now, like, we don't even really use the radio. If I'm following the sock on a pool or something like that, I just call everybody. Everybody's on the same call. Everybody's got it right there. So if the lineman sees something coming up or I see a dolly finna get caught or whatever, everybody knows to hold the pool or whatever the case may be. And I think too, given your lower guys responsibility on some key things that happens, you know, obviously the ground hand's going to run the rope rig and the tension rig and stuff like that, you know, but, even when they're not comfortable their first couple of days doing it, you know, like, no, that's yours. You know what I mean? And helping them and showing them, you know, we all know like rope rigs sometimes, you know, you say you get your pull in or whatever, you're trying to change to the other spool and they're having hell and you're just like, I'm going to wait a couple more minutes, you know, and they're going forward and backwards trying to find that sweet spot, you know. They're hitting it with the hammer and then you're like, hey, don't tear it up. It's what you got to do, you know, and then you get over there and every time it's like, blink. They're like, how'd you do that? And then you show them, it's like, hey, man, lock it down, get it to where that chain slacks. And then you can.
Angles. It's all about
tricks,
yeah.
You know. And then later on, your higher guy moves up and then you get a new hand in. Well, then he's telling him how to run it or he's telling him how the lineman likes it, you know. And when you can sit back and watch the progression of different guys and you recognize that they had issues with that before, they're doing a lot better now, you know. My lineman that I've got right now, I mean, he did a good job. Wire management sometimes was a little bit not up to what I like, you know. You can go over on a double dead end and there's 20 different ways. Some people go straight across. Some people make, you know, all that. I like mine flow, you know. And like I literally commented him just last week. I was like, jumpers are looking money, you know. And it just takes to create a new habit, you know, and how you want it to do it. And it may not be the next guy's way he likes to do it that you work for down the line, but if you're going to work for me, I would really like it to be like this, you know. And after a while, you start seeing it like, that's how you built it.
How do you have that conversation with, because this is real too, how do you have that conversation with someone that's, say, your lineman, that's got one way of doing things and you talk about it in the JSA, you go in there with a plan and halfway through the job, they're doing it the way they like it done. And you're just like,
I think you got to call them out. I mean, you have to call them out because if you don't nip it in the bud right now, it's just they're going to be like, well, hell, I've been able to get over him on that one, you know, and it's not like being, you know, a pain in the butt or anything like that.
So how do you approach that then?
I think just being up front and being like, look, man, this is how I want it. This is how I've always done it. This is how I like it. Now, it's two things, and I'm really thinking in my head here, like specifically jumpers. specifically. That's my thing. I like my
100%.
jumpers to flow out and
Sure.
whatever. But I do know too that I do give them a voice, and how many times I've been up there, or I'm sorry, on the ground, and I'm telling them how I want it done, and we need to run the jumpers like this or whatever, and they're like, man, I really think if we run it on this side of the pole, the cutout for that pot's going to be a lot better to clear. You're like, dang, yep, perfect, love it. I didn't get to see it from that side because you're actually eye level with it, and giving them the power of voice, I think, on that, to share their opinions. And then maybe I might chime in and we may go a whole different route than what we started with, And I think approaching it by like, no, we're not going to just do that. You know what I'm saying? Because I know whenever I first went to Brian, my foreman was actually my apprentice at another company, and we had changed paths, and he worked his way up and got a foreman position. And he liked to do things one way, and he trusted me on everything. You know what I'm saying? But when it came down to the nitty gritty, I have a mouth, and I'm going to tell him how I feel. But guess what? He is the one who makes the final call. Yes, sir. You know what I mean? All right. In your head, you might be talking noise. I wanted to do it like this. But at the end, he is the one.
Yeah.
And I think the guys that I've worked for, that since I've been running a crew, respect that.
Yeah.
And you have to establish it early. And I think once you establish it early about what I say is what's going to happen, even if you have given me a good reason, I'm not going to tell you to go with mine because it's wrong, and I'm just going to stick to my guns because it's me. If you're right, let's go with it. You know what I mean? If I feel like I'm right, I'm going to stick by my guns as well. And it's funny because we have our spec. They give us our spec book, and we have it all on a PDF or whatever, and that is the generic version of a pole. You know what I'm saying? Everything is so situational, And so I got the ground hand I got right now. He started with me, and we were framing a pole, and he's looking at the spec. He's like, that's not. I said, yeah, but that's how they want you to start out with, but we got a transfer or a 2-pot bank, and we got services, and we got open wire running this way. It's going to have to measure whatever. And it wasn't a week later, we come back on the exact same pole, but everything was opposite. It had like whatever, and he's like, well, that's not how you framed it last time. It's like, I'm telling you, this is like, that's how you start. You know what I'm saying? And go from there, and then like now, he'll be throwing out ideas, so we're going to put this like this, and when I remember kind of bouncing around, but I remember when I first started, my other foreman, whenever I was his ground hand, we pulled up to a job one time, it was pole change out, single phase, down by this little lake, and man, it had single phase, dead end. I mean, it was like going everywhere, and they're literally pole on the ground with a can hook and a drill, they're just like, wah, 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 wah. And I was like, you just tell me where you want the top staple for the copper, and I'll start, And like now, when you walk up to a pole and you're doing the same thing, you're just looking and you just know where everything goes. And then you see them start to catch on why you're doing it. And then when you don't quite get a chance to make it to the pole, they're already doing it, and you're like, oh, they're going to screw this up. And then you walk over and you're like, that's going to be all right. It makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And I think that creates that camaraderie to where they have a voice. Sometimes it gets them in trouble.
Yeah.
Because they have a voice.
Yeah.
But I think if you have enough respect with your guys to where what you say goes in the end, they know that just because they had an opinion and I shut it down, it's not the end of the world. Like, I'm not mad
I think
about
if you
it.
establish that, that's what I always try to do with new people that didn't understand that at the beginning. I'd just say that, like, look, we're going to build the plan together. We're going to talk about the plan. I'm going to ask your opinions. I'll get everybody's opinion, within reason. We only got a certain amount of time to get this going. So like, don't drag it out, but I'll give you a chance to give your opinion.
Yeah.
But in the end, I have to make the final decision. Sometimes I'll use yours. Sometimes we'll go with what I laid out. And that's just the way it is. Because I got to take it in the end.
Well, and we have our inspectors, and there's 3 inspectors. One of them is mainly underground, and the other 2 are overhead. And they try to split all the jobs between all the contractors in half. So you don't know, you may be on this guy. You have to look at the prints and see whose name's up there. So if you got a call or whatever, and I've got a great relationship with them all. And they're the best I've ever worked for anywhere. They're awesome. And I go to these, Quanta Elite or whatever the case may be, or on Storm, everybody's griping about their utility. I'm like, I'm sorry for y'all. I love where I work. I love it. But I know how each one of them are different. One of them sticks to their guns. And the other one, he always says, well, you're going to do what you want to do anyway. You know what I mean? And so with one of them, I present the problem. I present a solution. And then he usually just says, sounds good. And the other one, I don't even call him anymore, because in the end, when he goes and checks the job, why in the heck? And you explain to him, he's like, oh, I see what you're talking about. Cool. one of them I can do that. One of them is,
Yeah.
and they cracked me up. They the other day, one of them came to my job and was like, he said they were both out there looking at a job and they were trying to figure out what to do with this one pole or whatever. And they were like, what would Andrew do? Well, big dog, I tell you, I'd do it like this, And I'm like, whatever, dude. And all my guys were like, yeah, they nailed it. They nailed it. You know what I mean? And they're all old school cats, and they're so good. And when you have guys like that, like you mentioned earlier about safety men that have built power lines, you automatically have to have some respect for them. They built power lines. They've done what you do. You know what I mean? Yeah, I'm sure they got a power trip, and they also got their big safety man that's harping on them about, well, in that picture that you put on the audit, you didn't write to the fact that the neutral wasn't covered or whatever the case may be, So they have people on their back. We all have people on our backs. But when you have to work for guys and get checked by guys that have built power lines, it definitely helps with I think, relationships.
That trust as well. So what you can really do, I'm sure you know this, but like what you can really do is like to build that trust with your crew is make sure that if you're the leader, you're actually going to take the heat. So if you're telling them that, it's all on me in the end. So, but then, it comes down to the end and that guy there, he messed that up. That wasn't,
Well, because at the end, whenever you are racking up or whatever, it's on me to go over and do the final walk around.
100%.
So whenever they do call me asking about a question, I'm like, dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. And you go out like, why did they leave it like that? You know what I'm saying? So I think, do I do that at every poll? No. I have my own stuff. I mean, honestly, I have my own stuff going on, trying to get jobs turned in, whatever, So I try to, I really do. But I also trust that they do that. And I watch them sometimes. They really do that. I bet both of them do. My guys that I have now, even before. But, when they do rack up and they're taking that harness off, the whole time they're looking up to go do that scan to make sure everything's right. And how many times do they go, oh, hold on one second, put that rigger back down, and go up there and whether it got a lock nut that didn't get tightened or whatever, But, yeah, I think you definitely need to give everybody on the job site a little bit of power. Even that, like my new guy, dude, he's so cool. He's so funny. He's ready to rock and roll, and I love him. But I don't want him to see me not being a good leader to somebody else where he has fear of asking a question. That's what I don't want. If I'm in the truck and I see something, I'm going to say something. It may be the old window roll down, holler. Nobody wants to hear that, So I like to get out and be like, hey, man, we can't do it like that, And a lot of times they're like, yeah, you're right. I see that now. You know what I mean? One guy that I've got right now in the bucket, he's just not used to their spec, and, everything off the top side of the cutout has to go to a basket and hotline clamp. Everything. It don't matter. And nothing's going to the wire, and his first day, I caught him making up jumpers off of a cutout to the tail, and I was like, damn, now we got to replace all, burr wire to the cutout, just because he already trimmed it.
Yeah.
Luckily he hadn't taken the Mac off and all that stuff yet, but, I think also giving them the benefit of the doubt, that's big.
Huge.
That's big. That's big. You know what I'm saying? And that also falls into when you want to create a team and you want everybody to be on the same page and you do leave a job and you did check it or whatever, but they go out and inspect it and they are savages with the binoculars. They're going to find if something's wrong, whether it be a tie not finished off or a guy wire not the preform not fit. I mean, they find everything.
Sure.
And we've gotten to now we're grounding every street light, whether it be a yard light, street light, long street light, everything has to be grounded to the neck, not onto the bracket they give you with the ground lug. It's got to be its own new one, whatever. It's cool. It's part of it. It's what we got to do. When it's on the ground and you're getting that new street light, it sure is easy to put that, but when you don't have that ready and you hand it to them and now they're having to do stuff. But whenever they call me and say, hey, out there on that one pole, y'all did this, this, and this. Did your lineman not see that? And I'd be like, no, I must not have saw that. I didn't tell them that they had to do that. That was my fault. That was my fault. My bad. We'll get out there and get it knocked out. Even if it's something that I did because...
It goes miles, man. Does. Just taking that heat.
Well, because the next time the lineman's on the job and the inspector shows up, he can talk to me about it versus like, come on, man, you're up there, you got to do this. Yep. Versus telling me. And then they see him jump me for something they didn't do, knowing that I had their back type thing, And I'm sure a lot of that stuff that happens like that or situations like that never gets talked about. You know what I mean? It's in the know. Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's a good thing. I guess going to like the Quanta Elite type thing, it's funny. I tell the story about like whenever I got it, had no clue. I mean, I knew who it was, and I knew of the guy that got it last year at our company. Never met him before, nothing like that. And I knew it. You're like, dude, I work in Texas. I'm so far from the office. We only have 2 crews in Texas right now. There's not a chance. And it's not even in your mind. That I haven't even thought about it, to be honest with you. Go out there, do your job the best you can, make as much money for the company, get everybody happy, get everybody's hours, be safe, go home, start next day. You know, that was my goal. And make a name for yourself. That was my thing. I want to make a name for myself. And I remember being at the house. My wife was still working. We were off on Fridays, you know. So I'm sitting there with my little girl. She's watching cartoons. I get a phone call with the office area code. And I was like, I don't recognize that number, you know. And then it was like, hey, this is the CEO, you know. And I was like, first thing you're scanning, like, what did I mess up? You know, you're like, nah, it should be good. And they said, hey, man, we've nominated you for your Quanta Elite. You know, you're like, what? For, you know, I mean, you're like pumped, you know. And then I didn't even know my superintendent was on the phone too, you know. And we don't get a lot of the old, you know, you don't get that call, you're doing good. You know what I mean? And so I was so excited about it, you know, and I started just thinking about the times and the days that I made my guys stay late and push harder a lot. And so I honestly cannot say that it was even close to all on me. I didn't turn those wrenches. I didn't sag that wire. I just gave them a path. You know what I'm saying? They got the work done for me, you know, and so that's why I'm just so thankful that I was blessed to have the guys that I had at the time to where, dude, I didn't get any negative feedback from my guys. Everything. I mean, it'd be 3:45, finna go do a little low single service pole or a single phase pole, you know, knowing that it's not going to be that easy. And we're out there till 7. Everybody still got an hour and a half drive to the house. You know, and they didn't bitch.
But leading is hard. Like to say, yes, I 100% agree with you. But this is the piece that a lot of people don't understand. Leading is difficult. It's one of the most difficult things in the world to do. And like you said at the beginning, if this guy's still a leader after all of these years, still a foreman after all these years and hasn't been run off yet, he must be doing something right. Mm-hmm. So just to reiterate that to you, is like, you must have been doing something right.
Do you think, and I'll ask your opinion on this, but whenever you get like, so most of the time you're going to have your foreman, you're going to have 1 or 2 JLs, and you're going to have apprentices coming up. Is the end goal to have all journeymen on your crew? Maybe. But then, of course, your production's got to match all that. So then they're going to start taking some of the journeymen and start. But it seems like you always have a foreman, 2 journeymen, and then a mid, and then a low. Well, if we're advancing every 6 months and you're able to keep guys, you're eventually going to have a high crew. You know what I mean? And everybody's getting paid good. And then you start thinking, well, I got to start giving these 2 guys opportunities. You know, it's just like, what is like an opco's goal? Do they want all journeymen throughout the whole company in the end? You know, like you think about, like when I worked at the co-op, you know what I mean? Those guys are going to be lifers. Yeah. They're going to be there till they retire and have a big pension, you know, all that kind of stuff like that. What's a 3-year apprenticeship program there? I think it was maybe 4. But I mean, you're first class. So then you end up having every single employee out there in the field is all, which is great. But then you start thinking about, well, there's really only about 6 or 7 of them that can do, you know, whatever. But these guys are good at service. These guys here are good at troubleshooting. You know what I'm saying? Like, it all makes a proper team. But like, what's the end goal? You know, do y'all want all journeymen? And if that's the case, luckily that we are on the tail end of the era, and we have that big age gap where these guys are fixing to be, you know, we are going to need to fill upper management positions. That's great, you know, and that's something that I hope for. But not everybody is going to be able to advance continuously. You know what I'm saying? And do they get stagnant? Do they get tired of being where they're at? You know, if it's like you said, some of them love being a lineman. I'm not going to be a journeyman lineman. Some will be. You know, but the guys that do seek a path to higher positions, what are they? You know, I remember when I did work for the co-op, they posted every position that's even going to come available, you know, so you're like, ooh, I better get me a good game plan of why I want to write in for that position or whatever, you know, versus like, we just go to work every day.
The good people, from my experience, sometimes those positions don't exist. Like you just said, what are those positions? the good people create those positions, and it's through leading other people. So like in the beginning, you show up as a youngster and you don't know shit. Like you don't know nothing about the job, right? You show up, and what can you show up with then? What makes you valuable? What makes you stand out in the room? What can you do? You show up with a good attitude. You can show up with some work.
Show up for one. That's the first one.
Show up. You can show up. You can show up a little bit early too. Yeah. That'll set you even that much more work. Show up with a good attitude and some work ethic, and just start hustling. And like, screw this hustle culture bullshit. You gotta hustle in the beginning because that's all you have, because you don't know anything. And then you start learning the job, right? Okay, now I learned the job. Now I'm pretty good lineman if that's the job, right? I know enough to be really good at this job now.
Right.
Now what can I do? I can start leading people. So I start telling the kids in the beginning, you can show up with those things that I said. And if you want to set yourself apart, learn how to lead from the beginning. Like pour into self-development of leadership
I wish I had
skills.
you whenever I first started, because I did not have that guy telling me.
They don't listen anyway. But like, if you are listening and you want to set yourself apart and you want to be that guy, because it'll happen 20 years down the road, 26 years down the road, you're going to be in this position where you're going to know you're a lineman. You're going to know enough to be decent at what you do. And if you want to set yourself apart, you want to have spent that 26 years learning how to lead people, because that's what's valuable in the end. If you want those positions later, they're all leadership positions.
They all are.
Every single one of them.
I talked to you about this whenever we first talked about coming to the podcast. It was about, talking, this is definitely a lot easier than a crowd. I'm out. But I feel like stepping out and doing something that you're not comfortable with is something like you told me that you're like, oh, dude, big crowds at first, now I look at you, you're talking everywhere in front of everybody, and I'm sure it still gets to you every once in a while, but once you start, you're rolling, you're good. But I know, like, I've told people before, I sure wish that I would have gave any effort my first year and a half in line work. You know what I mean? It was just a paycheck. You know what I mean? And I remember that literally the pasture in the tree. I can bring you right to it. That we were sitting down eating lunch one day, and me and my wife at the time, we were just dating and everything, and we didn't know what we wanted to do. I was like, well, I think I'm gonna go try to get a job down in Woodlands or something like that. Not in power line work. I've only been doing line work for like 8-9 months, and I had looked at some apartments, and then I had looked at job offers, and I had put applications in. And I remember making one comment at the shade tree for lunch was, yeah, I think I'm finna get me a real job. Brother, there were crickets. And then I was like, well, this is a real job. And I was like, no, well, hold on. I gotta make a real paycheck. I'm making $12 an hour, and I'm cashing my check at the place at the Square in Crockett, and they're getting 6%. I need some money, and I think not long after that, it was somebody I took. I mean, I always like to do good work or whatever. I like to try hard, but I think really focusing on a career was about a year and a half in. And that was when I started to be able to start to do things. They started giving me tasks to do, whether it's, hey, man, you're setting double circuit poles with a digger truck. I love it. Awesome. Or it's, being able to get in the bucket and tie in. And I mean, I was tying in wire a year and a half. You got folks over here I've heard that are, they're up there like legit power line lineman status at a year and a half, 2 years at 2021, and I'm just like, and I work around some guys that are 21, 22, that have 2 years experience that think they're like, what I'm saying, God's gift to line work, and I personally work with somebody that ain't much older than that I'm like, dude, I just told him the other day, I was like, at 23, like literally I was just starting to touch primary. You know what I'm saying? And you started at 18, went to, all this line school, got thrown to the wolves early, and you're good. You're good. I mean, it's not like I'm just saying that. I worked around for a year and a half, and he helped me get the Quanta Elite. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you are good. At 23 years old, you're good. You're safe. You make the right decisions. You have an attitude. You know what I mean? And not egotistical by any means. He's
Yeah.
judgmental. He will tell you if you're, if he works around like, oh, dude, that dude's trash. You know what I'm saying? Like whatever, or he's unsafe or whatever the case may be, And I remember, I come up in a whole different culture of cover and when to use your rubber gloves. And if I had wire spread on spreader arms, I'm not putting that cutout up there with rubber gloves. I'm using leather gloves. That was back in the day. Like now, if the pole's hot, you're within the mad. The pole actually has energized primary on it at all. You wear rubber gloves. That's the name of the game. And I mean, we were on storm a couple of years ago, and we were in these old backyards, and he said we climbed in rubber gloves our whole second half of line school. He's like, every pole that I climb is, unless it's a brand new pole, like whatever, it's rubber gloves. It's just, that's what we do. And I had an old school cat that was near us at the time was like, man, that's just ridiculous. When I get to that neutral at service, I'll throw them on, but I'm not going to do it the whole way. And he's like, and I remember him commenting, if you're going to be up there for an hour and a half, why not just put them on at the ground? You know what I'm saying? But like, that's the mentality of other than the screw it mentality, the fight the system mentality. Yeah. And I'm like, so see what you just did there? You did the leader thing to where you're telling them just because you don't like the rules, we still need to follow the rules. You know what I'm saying? And I asked him, I was like, I'm going to bring you as a guest star today. And he was like, no, I'm just going to sit in the lobby and eat snacks. I don't want to talk to nobody. I was just joking with you, But I think that you can easily find leaders. I think you can easily detect leaders among crews, among groups. And I think you also can detect guys that are great followers. Then you have some guys that don't want to do none of it. You know what I'm saying? And there's still a use for some of those guys. Maybe there's a laborer.
100%.
You know what I mean?
Leadership's also a learned skill. There's naturals at it. So those ones it's so key to identify who those are and develop them soon because they already got it. But then others can be taught later. Like maybe it just comes along with maturity.
And I think also, like you talk about developing leaders, I think giving them responsibility at a small leadership role where they're maybe just handling one guy, like with my I guess you say like my other ground hand that has more experience, I'll be like, hey, I need you to make sure you take this cat with you today when whatever you want to go out there, make sure you do this. And just giving make sure you do a couple things. Yeah. Give him that checklist. And then that way, whenever he goes out there and he sends you pictures of the job site, even though you send him to go fix ruts and you're like, it's a lot of ruts. Go get dirt. Here's your wheelbarrow shovels, whatever. And they like, hey man, the lady come outside and she said, thank you so much or whatever, all these. And then the feedback for what happened while you were there, and when he naturally does that, you're like, dang dude, I gave you a task. You completed it. You gave me descriptions on how you did it and extra, when we were up there with that Nick Biddle or whatever, like I get this drip, whatever, and I just never forget, like, I really liked what he talked about the doer, the needer, all that stuff like that. You're like, you instantly start, as soon as he was explaining, you start putting people, that's you, that's you, and I think there is another category that he has that is everybody. That's like, there's a mix of all of them on some people.
For sure.
That handle not having information. I'll figure it out. I got that material on my truck. I don't need to see the list. I got everything. I stocked it yesterday. Yeah. Or some guys that are like, but how do you want to do this again? You know what I'm saying? And there's some guys that are like, well, if we get out there and it's like this, then I'll know what I need to do. Or, hey, if it is like this, you know what I'm saying? Like, and to see somebody like, I really like when Nick went up there and talked about it, but I like seeing his messages every week, and it's like, yeah, I need to use that, And I remember I have ADHD so bad, but I remember I got on the plane trying to read his book, dude, and I got to like page 30, and I was like, I can't do this. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's hard. I can't read. I just couldn't do it. And so I have it in my door of my truck, and I got that new Foreman Quanta Elite truck, and it's got a nice bass in it, and that dang book rattles, so I know it's there, and I'll park, and I'll just try to read it for a couple of seconds. I'll get a page in, I'll shut it, and I'll read it again, and it's just good stuff.
Mine's sitting on my desk.
It's like right there.
Looks me right in the eyeball. I do the same thing, dude.
I just look at it a little bit here and there. But and I think I've noticed that a lot of the stuff that he's sending weekly is, in it or whatever. And huge thanks to Quanta too, man, about like the whole Quanta Elite program. Like, the first thing at Lazy Q, that was cool. It was cool. I didn't get to see the museum and all that stuff like that, but it was still cool. Yeah. But like seeing the hospitality, the swag, the truck, and then like the effort they make every other week or whatever it is, where they start sending out newsletters and stuff like that, and then offering your feedback about things. Of course they always want answers and they want to hear from us and stuff like that, but whenever they gave us like the questionnaire about foreman, how do you make guys more want to be like a foreman? What's missing in the field? It's training. 100% is training. And I don't mean training as in like, how to properly back up a trailer in a parking lot. I mean, like, literally, like, what are the I&I, whether it's, like, for us, we just went through the transmaker class, great. But, like, what I think is, what about, like, regulators, capacitors, stuff like that? Where we work at specifically, they take a lot of that offline for us. So when we get out there, you got to shut your capacitors, get them down, or regulators. You might replace the whole rack, but it's already zeroed out, killed out, bypassed, whatever. But on storm, when I wasn't on storm with them in February, they were in Mississippi, and they had a situation to where there were some underslungs about 4 or 5 miles from the sub. And everything was obviously de-energized at one point. Well, somehow these underslungs got opened. Okay, so everything's de-energized. Well, now they have fed it up to this underslungs. Everything else is still being worked on. Well, now all that gets fixed, there was talk about wanting to heat it up from the underslungs. Like, dude, 10% of the line's heated up. Why don't we just drop them out right quick, close it, heat the sub, whatever the case may be. But then you have guys that would have just been like, all right.
Yeah.
And these things have been out there for 40 years.
Yeah.
How they might have fought them getting them open, whatever the case may be. And I just think that when it comes to like cap banks and stuff like that, we all know that regulators are dangerous, So yeah, if the utility wants to mess with it, go for it. You know what I mean? But you may pull up on one on storm when the power went out, that jugger's at 8. What do you do? And stuff. So there's guys out there that have never messed with them. And
you just don't know where you'll end up. Like you said, especially
it could be
with
next
storm,
week. It could be somewhere.
You don't know what part of the country or the world you're going to end up one day and see something and go, what is that?
I think you start with a questioning attitude, and that's the fear of not having a fear to ask questions. Yeah. So you think about, they always talk about, lean on your management for questions or anything you have. Well, like say you do come up on a regulator or something like that you're not familiar with, or it doesn't just feel right. Don't have the feeling of, hey, I'm calling to ask a question about this. Hope you're not mad that I'm calling because I should know this. It's like, they may even say like, hell, dude, I don't know. Let's get somebody else on the phone.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're unsure, ask, because we are in the trade of no second chances. Yeah. A lot of times we don't have second chances. So if you're unfamiliar or unsure or anything like that, you know what I mean? Let's take the right measures.
It's just like, it's a lot easier to ask the questions versus have something happen.
You ain't lying.
And have to deal with that.
Yeah, I have a good buddy of mine that
if you're hoping on hope.
Well,
for a good outcome.
And I feel like too, putting the right person in the right position, or not putting guys that are not ready, even though 99% of linemen are go-getters. As even a young cat, hey, go do this in the bucket. It's not that hard. Let's go cover this up. Whatever it is. Hell yeah, let me in the bucket. I'm ready. And I have a good friend of mine. That's the only, luckily, this so far in my career, that's the only person that I've known to get really hurt on power lines. But he had gone face to ground up there, and he was young, and burn marks straight through both hands, the whole nine. We're talking like phase 2 ground. I believe they had it on one shot. I don't know. But anyway, in the hospital, full life support. And, at the church, everybody's praying for him and stuff like that. And I did what I could, reaching out to all my buddies in every little group I've got, whether it be our buggy group or whatever. Everybody came through with some money to cover his camper costs, truck costs, whatever. And I'm telling you, 7 days from full breathing, everything, to walking out and going home. And like now he's like, obviously I don't think he do power line work, obviously again, but wow, it's a blessing. But let's just think about all the guys out there that have had less of a situation, whether a tail hit them or whatever, versus like a face to ground. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, put the right guys in the bucket. Make sure they're qualified. And also, I think, have good DQOs, man. I know it's hard to have a guy sit there and just watch. You got to get stuff done. Especially as a foreman, it's hard for me to have guys stand around and watch. But we need to have at least somebody watching them. You know what I'm saying? Because you can't trust all of this. Now we've got all these tools and we've got stuff. We got grips hanging off the front. We got drills and we got all kind of stuff going on, man. And that just means one more thing that could be touching an arm while you're over here messing with it. You know what I'm saying? There's just so many opportunities. And, back in the day for me, yeah, I thought about it, but I was didn't wear sleeves. We didn't have sleeves back in the day, you know, where when I come from, we didn't have them. I think we had one that were behind some random truck's front seat, you know, so you worked like this and you worked up here and you made sure you didn't have anything sticking out of the bucket. You know, like nowadays we got everything covered, you know, and I mean, you see videos and you see people working on, Facebook or whatever, you know, and you're like, damn, we got all kinds of stuff up here, you know.
I started watching the show. I think it's on Prime. It's called The Pit. It's, it takes place in an emergency room in a Pittsburgh hospital.
Okay.
And it's like, it's the Emerge, right? And the whole series is like 15 or 16 episodes, and every episode is 1 hour of the day in an emergency room. But what I'm getting at is it's a training hospital.
They're out there too, ain't they?
It's a training hospital. So I started watching this and I just thought, like, I thought about like when I was an apprentice, this is actually how the lineman, if there was a lineman or a foreman on the ground, okay, and I was the apprentice on the ground too, that lineman or foreman was constantly like, hey, look up. What point of the job are they at right now? Like, tell me about what you see. Do you see anything going on that's bad? Like, it was constantly quizzing the apprentice. And I thought like that was such a cool way to train the apprentice too, to do a couple of things, to constantly be that guy that's always just like trained to glance up and just like make sure they do a quick scan. You shit good. I know you're nodding your head because you do this. I know, but like not everybody does this shit, right? And I think that that's so critical too. Like, not just hey, look up. Like, hey, look up. What do you see? Do you notice anything goofy? What point of the job are they at? What are they doing now? Like, tell me. And that's what they do in the hospital. Like, okay, what are we looking at here? And it's the guy, the newbie's got to be like, okay, this is what's your prognosis? What do you think we should do? And he's got to give. It's not always what they'll go with, but they got to say back, like, this is what I see. This is what I would do.
Evaluate the situation.
Great way to train. It doesn't take but 2 seconds.
You need to make sure, like, if you are going to be like that with your apprentice, you need to make sure that he knows that he's not getting singled out.
100%.
You know what I mean? But I do think you're very right on quizzing, and I do that a lot I do show a little favoritism to the guy I got right now, and even my two on my other crew, man, they're such great guys, and they do such a good job. And it's funny because the guy that I got right now as a groundman, he does such a good job. But when we happen to merge crews or work on a big project, you know, it's wild how these two guys have been with, I'm not going to say with me, but have worked on our little teamwork system or whatever for a year and a half, and he can't keep up with them. But whenever I'm just with him all day, I'm like, dude, you're lights out. And it's like, dang. You know, my other guys that I used to have, they really are that good, but they make it look effortless because they're constantly moving. You know what I'm saying? Versus like run around with a chicken with a head cut off versus so efficient and everything's laid out and they know where everything's on their trucks, you know. Then I got Shane over here that's doing a dang good job because he was carrying the weight by himself for so long. And then whenever he gets to go there work with them, he's like, I hate working with those guys. You know, I'm like, why? He's like, I try to pick something up, it's done. You know, they're just a step ahead. And I think that come because I used to ask them all the time as well, you know. It's like, so what would you do up there? You know, of course, their answer is like, exactly what they're doing. You know what I mean? And that's usually the case.
Or then if they're saying that, then it's like, okay, what's the next step?
Yep.
Because then they get something that they can't see.
So these guys here have all worked in, the two ground hand I'm talking about over here have worked in West Texas for their first couple of months. Both of them working de-energized power lines, come to where we work in the city. Not Houston City, but, you know, in the urban area, and it's wide open, you know what I mean? And so they have done such a good job. And like my buddy over here, he's been all over the place. He's been working for North Houston Pole for a little while as his first little spot. Then he went to Idaho, then Montana working. So I'm like, bro, and he's like, it's just so much better to work distribution because you learn so much more every day. It's such a vast, he's like, you go over to transmission in Montana, it's like, it's just big and rocky and, you know, whatever. And I'm over here like, damn, that sounds badass. And he's like, yeah, I mean, the view's cool. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just two different views because I haven't done that and he has, you know. And I'm going to be honest with you, man, like looking and playing recruiter, trying to find different guys, you know, over the time. It's hard because you don't want to, you know, when you write your references down on an application, you know, and I talked to a guy and it's over Messenger, you know, and he's like, yeah, I got this much experience, whatever. You know, you're like, do you mind if I get your old foreman's number? you know, and if they give it to you off the bat, you're like, well, okay. You know what I'm saying? You call them and they're like, oh, dude, I'd hire him back, but we just live too far. You know, we work too far from his house. He ain't trying to work over here no more. Like, so you would hire him back. He's like, oh, in a heartbeat. Well, you know that's somebody that you can count on or even start the process with.
Yeah.
You know, and I've had a ground hand that when I talked to him on the phone for 30 minutes, dude, I was like, this guy is going to be the one. And then I called, actually, come to find out, I called his foreman that I used to work with a long time ago, didn't even know that was him. He's like, Andrew Morgan? I was like, yeah. He's like, what's up, it's Devin? And he was like, oh, you know, and he's like, oh, hell no. You know what I mean? Like, he's like, he's a good worker, but man, he never gets the big picture of things, you know, whatever. He's a single, I'm like, I really need somebody that can, you know, I'm looking for that guy, you know, and so it all works out, you know what I mean? But at the same time, when you do hire a guy that you have to get rid of, then your management's like, damn, you didn't, you know, look into him much. I'm like, dude, you want me to look into all these guys? We actually have a guy for that. And he does a good job, but like I said, we're out here in Texas, and I'm trying to make sure I hire someone that's local. Yeah. You know, and when I call the office for like a job pool, like, who you got working? They're like, well, we don't really have anybody in Texas. You're like, oh, that's right. We got 100 of them in Miami that are going to work, 100 of them in Louisiana that want to go to work. So it's just when we roll.
Yeah. I had this, we'll wrap it up here in a couple seconds. It's been a couple hours, but I had this job, company I used to work for, a company that Dean works for. They put a position in place years ago that was like this midway between HR and, I don't know if other companies do this, but it's midway between an HR position and the lineman, the foreman. And it was a role that was a lineman's position because he could speak the language of line. So he would be the one that would do like all of that preliminary calling, because he wasn't HR. He spoke the language, but then could also like speak the language of HR and like translate back to the HR department that, you know, this was the, but they could also speak to the foreman and be like, okay, let me go get all the answers for you about this person, then come back to you and tell you, to free up the foreman from having to do that.
And we do have that. We do have that guy.
Yeah, I think it's a great.
And he did the same thing with me whenever I hired on, you know, he asked me the questions, you know, and like, he asked me like, you know, 3-phase, and we do power line questions, you know what I mean, to make sure that I am a journeyman, you know. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, sounds good, you know. Well, let's go get the ball rolling, you know. And I was like, well, when I asked him, he sent me an email like for like, you know, drug test and all that kind of stuff like that, and it was like hiring, you know, recruiter or whatever. I was like, you know, and then kind of find out he was a lineman, you know what I mean. And that was one of the roles that they were able to put him in. Yeah. Just like we talked about, like find roles or create roles, you know. And I think too, like you think about Quanta's growth so far in the last, just say 5 years or whatever the case may be, like maybe not all those offices were filled. Maybe there was just 2 or 3 of them that were vacant. And now they're like, well, we got to build one over here on a couple blocks down. You know, it's growth, man. It's so good to see. And it's so good to be a part of, because I remember I was talking to my CEO or whatever when I talked to him not long ago about when we got bought out by Quanta. And I remember we were on the side of the road framing a pole, dead summer, dude. My foreman was looking at the spec on this job or whatever, and he's like, what the hell? We're like, what's up? He's like, we just got bought out by Quanta. It's like a mass email to the whole company, like, just let y'all know, starting Monday, everybody gets new email addresses, you know, all that kind of stuff like that. And I mean, I had heard and seen Quanta on TikTok or on Facebook and stuff like that, but I really didn't have any, you know. So of course you go home and then you start looking, you're like, no. You know, it's like, we got adopted, you know, the good parents, you know. And it's been great, man. Yeah. It's been great from insurance to, well, honestly, man, just to have the backing, to know that we're not going anywhere.
It's hard because just because I'm on social so much, I see both sides of people's, like, people will say, but they just don't understand or don't know. And I try to refrain on this show from my opinion too much on, like, I just try to keep it neutral. But honestly, God, like, I've been here since 2009.
Yeah, you got a track record to see.
4 different opcos, call them that, within the organization. You talk about creating your own position. All they want you to do is go and work. They need people to do things. And if you're any sort of a leader, you'll create those positions. Do you think this position existed? No.
We talked about that.
You created it. Head of craft media. Do you think that was a position?
Right.
No, but it's where the future's going. So it needs that spot.
And that has to come with optimism, and they've got it. Craziness.
100%. Yeah. And the company is littered with people that have just gone out, been leaders, done things, created a way, created a path. And that's what it is. So if you want to go back, if you want to wrap it up with going all the way back to the start, and you're just an apprentice and you're like, how do I get there? Understand that a career is a really long time. You don't have to accomplish everything in the beginning. But if you're an apprentice and you're like, well, how do I learn leadership skills? Ask your foreman if you can start delivering the JSAs. That's a good way to go, okay, it's going to put me in an awkward position. I don't know how to talk to people. Do hard things. That's a hard thing to do.
Right.
I'm going to deliver this thing. I don't really know. But you're going to get coached by your foreman, right? If you slip up and don't say something right, your foreman's going to step in and go, it's actually like this.
Right.
You dummy. And you'll get called out. You'll get whatever. You'll get razzed. You'll get teased. Start just doing that. It's going to put you in a position to learn how to communicate. It's going to put you in a position where you're in front of public speaking. You're going to learn how to talk to 30 people or 5 people, however many it is, so that when you get to that point 26 years down the road, you're good at it.
Yeah.
You've learned it.
Well, that's just like, you think about going to Mexico primary the first time.
Yeah.
Then they fast forward, you're good, you're golden, And I think that is a very good point. And I think that I try to, sometimes you try to just keep the burden on yourself because they do have other things they need to be doing in the mornings and whatever the case may be. But I do like when you get a guy in there that hasn't done the JHA and he starts riding it, and he's like, man, I'm like, yeah, that's why it's chicken scratch about halfway through it. Just like, I'm just trying to get this thing done, dude. But then, they know the hospital address by memory. You know what I'm saying? Then like I'm sure everybody has similar, but like on our JHAs, it has like the job number, which is actually our Quanta number, and then our work order number, and they're like, what is this 13 dash? Like, you didn't know that? Like, nah, I didn't know that. It's like, okay, so they start finding things out, and also too, I think that on our deal, we have our task, our hazards, and how we're going to mitigate, or whatever on our JHAs. And of course, like obviously drive to the job, first one, and so in my mind, I'm always trying to think of new things to write down so where it's not just repetitive. We have to write a new one every single day, every task, whatever. And, you give a ground hand, they're going to give you crushing hazards, cut hazards, pinch points, slip, trips, and falls. That's pretty much all they can come up with, you know what I'm saying? And then you see after their 4th, 5th, 6th one, they're like, they're talking about difference in potential. We really need to pull meters. We need to, then it starts getting even more. We need to have a rescue response plan, an exclusion zone. You're like, yeah, boy, start putting it in there, and it really starts, you start seeing that growth. And like you said about speaking in front of the crew and stuff like that, I think that is something that, if you're working around the guys that you already know, it shouldn't be that hard. But I also will say that, talk about safety man, going kind of back to the beginning. That guy that I was telling you about that been here for so long, was a lineman for so long. We were on Milton and Helene, and we had been from Tampa all the way to the Carolinas. Now we're back in Tampa, and we're like on week 3, and everybody's done on their 3rd wind. Still got good attitude, but everybody's about ready to go to the house. And every morning we're meeting at that same parking lot. He's giving a safety meeting every morning, And so when the general foreman was there, at the time he's giving his little small speech or whatever, you see him take that last drag of that cigarette, and here he's going to get it. And every single day he brought up new things. And I'm like, dude, we're on the 23rd day, and you're still coming up with good stuff to keep everybody listening. Whether it just be obviously back feed and this, that, and the other. Then he'll throw out some stuff, man, this area's got bad snakes. You're like, damn, yeah, probably, just new, whatever it is. And I remember we got dismissed from that storm, and I went to him, and I said, man, I just got to tell you. I was like, you did a good job, especially the safety man. Everybody's like, Here he goes again, but everybody's watching and listening. Yep. And it wasn't like no 30 second. It was a 3 or 4 minute, here you go, briefing for the day. And that's hard to do as a safety man. It's hard. I promise. We all know. 100%. And I was just like, we all are about to leave. Everybody's putting them old bucket trucks and we're about to head home, And I was like, hey, man, I just want to tell you, my guys even talked about the truck, like, that dude, I don't know how he does it. He keeps us involved with what he's talking about. And those are the kind of guys that that they can show up on that job site and you're going to be all right. You know what I mean? As long as you're doing you like you're supposed to do you, you're going to be good to go. You
can put those apprentices in your truck too. And when you call a control center and request permits, you say, hey, I got my 5th step, 6th step here with me. I'm going to be listening the whole time, coaching him through it, but I'm going to have him, go through the motions of requesting this permit or returning it. Oh yeah. Jammed right up. But that's the thing, like do hard shit, man. That's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sure. It's funny. We had we're supposed to call a lot of our one shots and stuff on the radio. Dude, I'm not trying to fight for my spot with all the guys at the utility, same radio, same thing. So I just call, and I get direct access, And at that time I had went on vacation, whatever, my lead lineman was like, so I gotta say what now? And I was like, I wrote it down for him. I was like, straight up, hey man, ask for request for this. This is the pole number you're working at. Blah, blah, blah. We're gonna have this many transformers out, whatever. And he told me, like, dude, day one, I was looking at it like, and then day 3, 4, and at the end, he's like rolling. And now here's a foreman. He calls them all in all the time. He's good to go. And I think getting everybody familiar with the task on the job, like you said before, I think is key. And it may be out of their wheelhouse. It may be definitely out of their comfort zone. Everybody's got to get out of their comfort zone sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that will lead you into opportunities where you're not scared to take charge.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think we always have to be training our next guys, like we talked about. And maybe that's one thing that I can work on more also too. It really is letting those young guys have something that I do that, obviously like talking to dispatch and getting all that is very serious business. If something ever was to happen, they're going to go back on that recorded line and make sure, hopefully old boy's ready for them to play back his, we're on a feeder, but hey, you're doing it.
So that's a good point, actually. That's a really good point. So we focus on the line work, right? And having the apprentice like figure out what's next, or the groundman figure out what's the next step, and having shit ready. But what's like something a foreman could do to align the next lead lineman that's wanting to be the foreman? That's something in the foreman role that they could start paying attention to as a next step. Like you could be quizzing them, right?
Honestly,
so what's the next step for foreman
us? Everybody's got different ways of billing. Everybody's got, some people know how much they're making. Some people don't. We don't really get to know how much we're making. We just know that if we ain't getting hollered at, we're doing a good job, But I think when we do have our prints for like right now, it's way easier on a reconduct because you don't have to turn all that into the end of the job. You know what I mean? So if you're out there for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, at the end of the job, as long as you got all your new pole numbers and what you did on this job, on this pole by pole by pole by pole at the end, you just turn it in. Well, like for me, especially like a junction pole with transformers and multiple services and all that, if it hits the ground, I'm splicing it because I get a charge for splicing. You know what I'm saying? If it's got 6 services, I don't care if it's going to make it back. We're going to cut it, we're going to splice it, and it's going to be fresh and, try to make the money for the company, whatever. But whenever it comes time to write those prints, you know what I'm saying? Like, they should know all of the terminology for the type of poles, whether it's the ground, the pole ground, the ground rod, or different kind of anchor guide. They should know all that already. They should, because I send most of the reconducts to everybody on the crew. That way they can see if they're framing a pole and I'm not there. But when it starts to come down to like adders or red lines, you know what I mean? They used, especially this new crew, they used to get kind of upset, not really, but about wanting to sleeve everything. If we come up on a neutral and it's rotted and it's got a bunch of squeeze-ons all the way through it, and we're going to side set it. Well, it's not going to work out. I already got your wire, your sleeves, and your red wire mat ready to go ahead and get it done, and they're like, damn, what's going to happen? But they hate it when it's 4-aught neutral, what I mean? But everybody does. But I mean,
everybody hates
even though that I am putting more load on them, they never see it. But I do hear like, man, y'all are killing it out there. You know what I mean? And if I sleeve 3 services a day times whatever, you know what I mean? In the end, it comes back better, And I think efficiency is a big thing. Handline, we try to, sometimes our guys go work a pole without a handline. But we try to make sure it's with us every pole. Not only for a rescue or whatever the case may be, but boom down, boom up, boom down, boom up, or it eliminates also throwing stuff up in the air, you know what I mean? And being familiar with the handlines when you do have to use it on storm. Folks are out there, and it's amazing when you watch guys like in California on videos, you actually get to watch a full process and fast forward to them like sitting in the backyard pole with a helicopter or whatever. And then it's like, how did they get all that transferred so fast? Because they're familiar. They got it down, you know what I mean? And it's amazing to watch.
There's nothing worse than being up there too, and you need shit and you can't move because you're just phasing a jib, something.
Yeah, get real.
You're like, fuck.
Yep.
Now what?
And it's amazing to watch, like just in rigging and all that stuff. It's just amazing to watch new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And try new things. And I mean, I've always tried to make myself better and make my guys better and stuff like that, you know. And same thing with just simple things about whether it's tying a neutral down to a truck where we can get it, you know, set a pole or whatever the case may be. You know, I see them, they're just like getting it. I'm like, dude, why don't you just throw you a knot outside, go around somewhere you can cinch it down, you know, and then just slip tie it or whatever. And then, well, now instead of two of them trying to pull it, trying to tie it to the hitch, now they're like, one person can do it. You know what I mean? It's just making it, just make everybody better. Yeah. That's my goal. That's my goal, and myself. Sometimes I end up spending more time trying to make everybody else more efficient. And then the only way that I know to make myself surely more efficient is be proactive, not procrastinate. So when we get if something needs to be done, I try to do it right now. Because if you let it just sit for a little while, it's so hard. Stuff starts piling up on you.
That's hard with ADHD though, because that's how we live. Is just
so hard.
Wait for everything to be freaking pressured.
Why do you have 2 hours more than everybody else? Because I stayed at the yard when I was done. I finally turned everything in, you know. But I have to stay on top of it. And notes. I try to take as many notes as possible. I really do, because you may go a while when nobody asks questions, and all of a sudden billing calls you and they ask you questions, you know, and like, oh yeah, dude, right here I did this, and this, you know. And it's crazy. My short-term memory is not as good as my long-term, you know, and they'll ask me something, and because I took notes or it's in my iPad, it is 1 second and I have it, boom, you know. So it's all part of it, you know. Improving on yourself, I think, is key, and finding ways to do that is hard sometimes. Try new things. If it doesn't work out, try something else, you know.
100%.
I just want to be the best I can. And if I show that I'm trying to improve the way I do things and more efficiently, then other guys are willing to try new things also. You know what I mean? So here I am doing new things.
Cool, buddy. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for doing this. It wasn't that bad, hey?
No, it was great. I was super excited.
Good stuff, dude.
Yes, sir.
Hope you guys got some value from the pod. Please hit subscribe. Love you. Peace.